The storm came without warning. So did she. One moment, Cole Mercer was laughing with his teammates in a roadside bar outside Blackridge Naval Station. Loud, drunk, untouchable. The next, his wrist was bent backward at an angle that made 3 combat veterans go pale. 2 Rangers lay on the floor. One couldn't breathe. The other was still trying to figure out what wall he'd hit. The woman who'd done it stood there without a scratch, water dripping from her hoodie, blood at the corner of her own mouth, and the most terrifying calm anyone in that room had ever seen in another human being. Cole had slapped her 6 seconds ago. He would spend the rest of his life regretting it. If this story finds you tonight, stay until the end. Like this video, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The rain started around 9, and by 9:30 it had turned mean. It came off the Pacific sideways, the kind of rain that found gaps in jacket collars, and punished anyone stupid enough to be outside without a reason. Along Highway 17, the roadside establishments that served the military crowd around Blackridge Naval Station kept their lights on and their doors unlocked because storms were good for business. Sailors and soldiers didn't go home when the weather turned ugly. They drank through it. The bar was called Rourke's, which was also the name of a man who had died in 1987 and left the place to his daughter, who had since sold it to a retired Navy cook named Paulson, who kept the original sign because it saved him the cost of a new one. The sign glowed amber through the downpour. The parking lot held a mix of civilian trucks and 2 government-plated SUVs that didn't belong to anyone who wanted that fact advertised. Inside, the room smelled like old wood, fried food, and the particular brand of tension that gathered whenever a group of young men with combat training and too much alcohol occupied the same space. The jukebox in the corner played something with too much bass. The television above the bar was tuned to a weather report that nobody watched. Sergeant First Class Cole Mercer sat at the center table with 4 members of his Ranger Chalk. They were 3 days out from a rotation that had taken them somewhere the paperwork described as a training exercise, and the injuries on 2 of them suggested otherwise. They had earned tonight. They had ordered doubles and argued about football and insulted each other with the casual viciousness that passed for affection among men who'd trusted each other under fire. Cole was 31, broad in the shoulders, and had a jaw that looked like it had been designed to take punches. He had brown eyes that moved fast and a mouth that moved faster. His unit called him Mercer because they called everyone by their last name, and they called him specifically with a particular tone. The tone reserved for the guy in the group who was undeniably good at his job and who knew it and who would remind you of it without much prompting. He had a silver star he never talked about, and 3 unsuccessful relationships he also never talked about, though for different reasons. At the far end of the bar, alone on a stool she'd chosen with her back to the wall, sat the woman. She had arrived before the Rangers did, sometime around 8, and had ordered water. Not sparkling. Tap. The bartender, a heavy-set man named Gilroy, who had learned to read rooms the way sailors read weather, had glanced at her twice and then left her alone, which was exactly what she wanted. She wore a gray hoodie that had been washed so many times the fabric had gone soft and thin in places. Her dark hair was pulled back without ceremony. She had a bruise along her left forearm, 3 days old by the color of it, that she made no effort to conceal or explain. She was not drinking, she was not looking at her phone. She was simply present in the way that certain people are present, completely, without visible distraction, as if stillness were a skill she had practiced until it became default. Nobody paid much attention to her. That was the point. Cole noticed her at some point between his second and third drink, the way men in bars sometimes notice women. Suddenly, as if she'd appeared rather than been there all along. He said something to the ranger on his left, a lanky Georgia-born specialist named Dukes, whose real name was Andrew, but who answered only to Dukes. Dukes glanced over, made a face that communicated mild assessment, and went back to his drink. "She's been sitting there alone for an hour," Cole said. "Some people like sitting alone," Dukes said. "Nobody likes sitting alone. I like sitting alone." "You don't count." Cole was already pushing back his chair. The walk across the bar took maybe 15 steps, and Cole covered them with the loose confidence of someone who had never seriously considered rejection as a personal outcome. He pulled out the stool beside the woman without being invited and sat down with his forearm on the bar and his body angled toward her, cutting off her sight line to the room. "Rough night to be drinking alone," he said. She looked at him. A single direct look, the way you might look at something you were trying to identify. Then she looked back at the water glass in front of her. "I'm not drinking," she said. "Even better. You've got your wits about you." He smiled. It was a practice smile, the one that generally worked. "Cole, and you are?" "Not interested." The smile held. "You didn't even—" "I heard what you were going to say." Her voice was quiet and even and had no edge to it, which somehow made it more final than if it had. "The answer is still no." Cole absorbed this. He had a particular response to being told no that involved the smile going slightly harder and the charm getting slightly louder, as if volume were a persuasion tool. "You don't even know what I was going to say." "I know exactly what you were going to say." She didn't look at him again. "Go back to your table." At the center table, Dukes was watching with the expression of someone observing a car merge without checking mirrors. The other three Rangers had caught on and were grinning, which was the worst possible development, because Cole's behavior in front of an audience operated by different rules than his behavior alone. "She'll come around," someone said. Cole didn't look back. He turned his body a degree toward the woman and lowered his voice, which was not quieter but was meant to be interpreted as intimate. "I'm just trying to have a conversation. You seem like someone with stories." "I have stories." "Yeah?" "None of them are for you." That landed wrong. Not because it stung, though it did, a little, but because it got a laugh from somewhere in the room, and Cole was not sure if it was directed at him, and the uncertainty was worse than the rejection. He straightened on the stool. The smile was gone. "Little harsh, don't you think?" She picked up her water glass and took a slow sip and set it back down on the coaster with the precision of someone who moved through the world without wasted motion. "I said no. Once. Clearly." Her eyes stayed forward. "That should have been the end of it." Cole stood up from the stool. The table behind him had gone quiet in the specific way that meant everyone was paying attention and nobody was going to intervene, and several of them were curious enough about the outcome to keep their mouths shut for once. He should have walked back to his table. He knew it. Later, he would try to explain to himself why he didn't, and the answer he kept arriving at was the audience, which was not a satisfying answer but was the honest one. He slapped her. An open-handed strike across the left side of her face. Not the worst he could have done. Not a closed fist, but hard enough that the sound cracked through the bar the way sounds only cut through a room when everything else has gone suddenly, instinctively quiet. The jukebox happened to cycle between songs at that exact moment. For 2 full seconds, the only sound in Rourke's bar was rain against the windows and the hum of refrigeration units behind the counter. Blood touched the corner of her mouth. Cole stood with his hand still half raised and something unresolved in his expression. Triumph that hadn't settled into triumph. Defiance that was already looking for an exit. And the woman did not cry. She did not flinch. She did not raise her hands. She turned her head back from the direction of the blow, slowly, the way a compass needle returns to true north, and she looked at Cole Mercer with eyes that were the most alarming shade of calm he had ever seen in another person. Not the calm of shock, not the calm of someone processing what had just happened, the calm of someone who had already decided what came next and was in no hurry about it. Gilroy behind the bar went completely still. A retired Marine near the pool table set his cue down quietly without looking away. 2 female soldiers near the window exchanged a glance that contained a full conversation without a single word. And somewhere in the oldest part of Cole Mercer's brain, the part that predated training, predated ego, predated the Silver Star, and the 3 failed relationships, an alarm he couldn't name went off. He had made a mistake, not a bar fight mistake. Something worse, something he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. The woman touched the corner of her mouth with the back of her thumb, looked at the blood there with the faint clinical interest of someone checking a map, and then set her hand flat on the bar. "One chance," she said. Her voice hadn't changed. Not 1 octave, not 1 degree. "Walk away." Cole Mercer laughed. It came out louder than he intended, partly because of the audience, partly because some wire in his decision-making had already shorted out, and the only path that felt available was forward, and partly because the woman was small, and she was calm, and she was alone, and none of that registered in his nervous system as a threat the way it should have. "Or what?" he said. She didn't answer. She moved. What happened in the next 11 seconds would be discussed in Rourke's bar for as long as the bar remained standing. 4 different people who witnessed it would describe it 4 different ways, not because they hadn't been watching, but because it happened so fast and so cleanly that the human mind, which prefers narrative to chaos, had to construct the sequence after the fact from pieces. The reconstruction, assembled from 6 accounts, went approximately like this. She came off the stool without telegraphing it. No coiling, no shift in weight that signaled preparation, just transition from stationary to motion in a way that violated the observer's expectation of how quickly a human body could change state. Cole's first instinct was to grab, and his right hand moved for her forearm, which was exactly what she expected. She turned into the grab rather than away from it, got under his elbow in a motion that had no name in civilian vocabulary, but that the Marine by the pool table would later describe as a wrist lock I haven't seen since Pendleton. And Cole's arm was suddenly wrong, joints under stress at an angle that made standing upright impossible without making it worse. He went to one knee, not because she shoved him, because the geometry of what she'd done to his wrist left him no other structural option. Dukes was already moving from the table, chair scraping. He covered the distance in 3 strides and reached for her shoulder. She released Cole's wrist, released it cleanly, not through it, released it with a control that was somehow more alarming than violence, stepped aside without appearing to rush, and did something to Dukes' center of balance that Dukes himself could not afterward explain. Only that the floor came up at him with no warning, and the breath left his body on impact, and he lay there for a moment doing an impression of a man trying to remember what oxygen was for. The 3rd Ranger, a compact and experienced sergeant named Briggs, who had 4 years of combatives training, processed the first 2 outcomes faster than most would have, and adjusted his approach, going lower, trying for a takedown rather than a grab. He was better than Dukes. He had training in this. She let him get almost to her center of gravity before the bar edge connected with his upper back, in a movement that looked less like she'd thrown him into it, and more like she'd suggested to the room's architecture that it become involved in the situation. Briggs slid down the bar to the floor, knocking over 2 glasses, and stayed there making a sound like someone trying to start a cold engine. 9 seconds. The woman stood in the space where 3 Rangers had been, and there was nothing theatrical about her posture. No stance, no squared-up, ready position. She just stood the way she'd been sitting on the stool. Present, complete, without wasted signal. The blood was still at the corner of her mouth. She had not wiped it away. The 2 remaining Rangers at the table had not moved. They were experienced men. Their experience was what kept them in their seats. Cole Mercer was on one knee on the barroom floor, cradling his wrist against his chest, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has discovered that a door he's been pushing against for years opens the other way. The arrogance was still there, but it was quieter now, and something had gotten behind it. The woman looked at him for one moment, then she reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and set something on the bar next to her water glass. A coin. She walked out. The door to Rourke's opened and a gust of Pacific rain swept across the floor, and then the door shut and the sound of her footsteps on the wet pavement outside faded into the weather and was gone. For a moment no one spoke. Gilroy moved first. He came around the bar with a damp cloth he'd been holding since sometime around the wrist lock, crossed to where Dukes was sitting up with his hand pressed to his sternum, and said, without inflection, "You all right?" "Yeah." Duke's voice was about half its normal volume. Yeah. Briggs was upright against the bar, touching the back of his head, blinking with the careful attention of someone checking whether everything was still attached. Cole stood up from the floor without assistance, and without looking at anyone. He picked up his glass from the table and drank what was left in it and set it back down. The coin sat on the bar beside the water glass. Dukes got to his feet and walked to the bar and looked at it. His face changed. Mercer. What? Cole didn't turn around. Come look at this. I don't want to look at Mercer. Something in Duke's voice cut through, not alarm exactly, the particular flatness of a man delivering information that had weight to it. Come look at this. Cole crossed to the bar and looked down. The coin was military issue in its dimensions, but not standard in its design. No branch insignia, no rank. A specific seal that was not the kind of seal that appeared on challenge coins that got passed around at reunions and retirement parties. The lettering around the edge was abbreviated in the way that classified designations got abbreviated, truncated not for brevity, but for the principle of it. Briggs had come to look. So had the Marine from the pool table, who had crossed the room without being invited because some things outweighed social convention. "Is that what I think it is?" Briggs said. The Marine said nothing. He picked up the coin, examined the edge, set it back down, and walked back to his pool table without another word, which was an answer. Dukes looked at Cole. Cole looked at the coin. "What unit?" Cole said quietly. "Not bluster. A real question. Naval Special Warfare Development Group has a black operations component," Dukes said. "Nobody talks about it. They do the missions that don't exist in the after-action reports. The ones where the team is smaller than 6, and the target is something the DoD officially doesn't have an opinion about." The bar had gone quiet in a different way than it had been quiet after the slap. That had been the silence of shock. This was the silence of recalibration. Cole looked at the door. The rain was still hammering the windows. The parking lot outside would show him an empty stool and wet pavement. "We didn't embarrass a civilian," Dukes said. Cole said nothing. "We attacked an operator." Dukes picked up his glass, found it empty, set it back down. "I don't know how far up the chain that coin goes. I don't want to know, but I want you to sit with that for a second." Cole stood at the bar for a long moment. The adrenaline was metabolizing. The wrist he'd been cradling was beginning to report in with more detail. He became aware that the bar had not returned to its previous noise level. Conversations that had restarted were quieter, positioned differently. People were watching without watching. He had the specific feeling of a man who has done something irreversible. Outside, the storm built against the highway. In the parking lot, headlights moved slowly through the rain and then were gone. The woman had driven away. And in the morning, Cole Mercer would open his orders and find out exactly what that coin had been trying to tell him. He was in his bunk at 0534 when his phone lit up with the notification. Not a call. A message from the battalion operations sergeant, delivered through the secure app they used for official communications, which meant it had been coordinated upward before it reached him. He sat up in the dark of the barracks room he shared with Dukes. Dukes was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bunk with his phone in his hand and an expression that Cole had never seen on him before, which was the expression of someone who did not know what was happening and who found that fact specifically concerning. "You got it too?" Cole said. "Whole chalk." Dukes set his phone down on his knee. "What did we do?" It wasn't a question. The message read, "Mandatory Combat Assessment and Proficiency Review, 0800 hours, Facility 7, Blackridge, NSA. All 5 personnel assigned to Chalk 3, 2nd Ranger Battalion Detachment. No exceptions. Report in PT gear. Leave all personal devices in vehicle. Facility 7. Cole knew the facility by location and by the warning that accompanied its name in base gossip. Classified training space. Restricted access. Used by units that did not post their training schedules on shared calendars. He had never been inside. He sat on the edge of his bunk in the gray pre-dawn and turned his phone over in his hands and thought about the coin on the bar and about eyes that had been calm in a way that had nothing to do with peace and about the specific quality of stillness in a person who has trained so deeply that the training has become the person. "Dukes," he said. "Yeah, we're in trouble." "I know." "How much trouble?" Dukes was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain from the night before had stopped, and the silence it had left behind was the particular silence of a coastal morning, salt-edged and cold. "I don't know," Dukes said. "That's what worries me." Facility 7 was a low concrete building set at the northeastern corner of the base, away from the main training areas, accessible by a service road that wasn't marked on the public base map. At 0755, Cole's chalk assembled in the parking lot outside. 5 men in PT gear, most of them having slept poorly and none of them having eaten, because the notification had come before the chow hall opened and nobody had wanted to say that out loud. Briggs had a visible welt on the back of his neck from the bar's edge. He hadn't mentioned it. Nobody had mentioned anything about the bar since they'd left it. The door to Facility 7 opened at 0800 exactly, held by a base security officer who checked IDs without conversation and gestured them through a corridor that ended in a large training room with mirrored walls and mats on the floor and the particular overlit flatness of a space designed for observation. At the front of the room, standing at parade rest before a whiteboard that had nothing written on it yet, was the woman from the bar. She was in military training attire now. The faded hoodie was gone. Her hair was pulled back the same way. On the left breast of her training shirt, partially visible, was a name tape. Cross. The bruise on her lip was still there, in its exact second-day color. She had done nothing to conceal it. Cole stopped walking. The man behind him, Specialist Tanner, walked into his back. "Keep moving," Tanner said. Cole moved. He crossed the floor and took a position in the loose line that was forming, and he stood there with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the woman who had bent his wrist backward 11 hours ago in a roadside bar. And he waited. She let them wait for a moment. Not performance. Cole would figure that out later. She was simply finishing a thought. When she spoke, her voice was the same as it had been in Rourke's. Level, without register, words placed like objects on a shelf. "Commander Ava Cross," she said. "Retired Special Warfare, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Black Operations Component. Currently contracted as Advanced Combat Assessment and Proficiency Consultant to Tier 1 and Tier 2 units at this installation." A pause. Brief. That carried weight the way silences carry weight when the person producing them is comfortable with them. "You've been flagged for mandatory reassessment following a performance review of your last rotation. That is the official reason you are standing in this room. You are free to accept it as the complete explanation." Nobody spoke. "I need eye contact when I'm talking," she said, not raising her voice, looking at the end of the line where one of the rangers had been studying the floor. The ranger looked up. "Thank you." She turned to the whiteboard and wrote 3 words. Assessment, evaluation, performance. Then she capped the marker and turned back. "Second thing," she said, "last night happened. I'm not going to address it beyond this. Whatever you thought you walked into in that bar, you were wrong. About me. About the situation. About your read of the room. I am telling you this not because I require your acknowledgement of it, but because your operational failure to correctly assess a situation before committing to an action is exactly the kind of deficit this assessment exists to address." Her eyes moved down the line and stopped on Cole. "Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Cole said. The words came out without the usual insulation of irony. He didn't know why. He knew the reason the moment he thought about it, which was that she had looked at him in a way that made irony feel like a child's toy, and he was not in the habit of pulling out child's toys in front of people he couldn't categorize. "Clear?" She addressed the room. "Yes, ma'am." 4 voices, imperfect unison. She wrote something else on the board. A number. 2,200. "Your first assessment block runs from right now to 2,200 hours. There will be no breaks beyond what the schedule indicates. There will be no group discussion of what you observe unless I initiate it. Your performance will be assessed and recorded, but will not be shared with your chain of command." That last point is important. She set the marker down. "Anything you demonstrate in this room stays in this room. I am not here to damage your careers. I am here to find out where the actual gaps are. Those are different objectives, and I want you to understand the difference before we begin." Dukes, from the far end of the line, said, "What are we being assessed on?" Cross looked at him. "Everything," she said. What followed was not what any of them had expected, which was itself, Cole would later understand, part of the assessment. They had anticipated physical challenges, close quarters drills, obstacle courses, the performance metrics that showed up on Army evaluation forms and could be trained for with a week's notice. What Cross did instead was work in a register that had no named category on evaluation forms. She put them through a scenario. Urban environment. The training room reconfigured with modular barriers into something that approximated a hallway network. Opposing force role-played by 2 instructors she'd brought with her who said nothing and introduced themselves only by the numbers taped to their shirts. The scenario. 1 friendly force, structural compromise, 1 HVT in an unknown location, radio communication degraded by 70%. Standard. Cole had done it 300 times. Except Cross made one addition that wasn't on the scenario card. Halfway through, she walked in. Not as herself. As a civilian. She had put on a coat over her training shirt and she was carrying something, a bag, and she was behaving with the deliberate behavioral pattern of someone who was not supposed to be in the building but had a reason for being there that she was not going to explain. The Rangers processed her in 1.3 seconds and designated her non-threat on the basis of gender and apparent civilian status and continued their sweep. She let them finish, then she stopped them. "What did you see?" she said. The coat was off. The instructor was back. "Civilian non-combatant," Briggs said. "Determined non-hostile, standard protocol." "What did you actually see?" Slower. The repetition had a different weight than the first asking. "Not the category, what did you see?" Silence. "She was moving parallel to our ingress route," Tanner said, slowly, working it out. "Holding the bag on the left side, near hand, empty." "And?" "The bag was wrong," Duke said suddenly. He sounded like a man recognizing something he should have seen in time to matter. "Weight distribution. She was holding it like it had nothing in it," Cole said. Cross didn't confirm or deny. "Your opponent in the 21st century is never going to be the person who looks like an opponent. The ones who cost you are the ones you already decided were not the problem." She looked at Cole. "Categorizing before observing. The root of most preventable casualties in complex urban environments." Cole held her gaze. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant a "yes, ma'am" in longer than he wanted to admit. The day ran long and deliberately uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable in the way of physical punishment. She did not punish them. Uncomfortable in the way of precision, of having the things you thought you knew tested against what you could actually produce. By mid-afternoon, the 5 of them had done 4 assessments, and in each one, patterns had surfaced. Tendencies, defaults, the operational habits that training had laid down so deep they'd become invisible. Cole made the same mistake twice. Assuming, acting on the category before completing the observation, Cross noted it both times without comment, made a mark on her clipboard, moved on. It was worse than being called out. Being noted was worse somehow. Being cataloged. At 15:30, there was a 15-minute break. Water. The Ranger sat on the mat in a loose cluster and nobody talked for a while. Briggs said finally, "She's not what I thought she'd be." "What'd you think she'd be?" Tanner asked. "I thought she'd make it about last night. I thought the whole thing would be about last night." He shook his head. "She hasn't said a word about it." "She said a word about it this morning," Dukes said. "One sentence, then she moved on." Briggs stretched his neck carefully, feeling where the bar had connected. "She could have made this miserable. She's not." Cole was looking at the mirrored wall across the room, specifically at the faint reflection of Cross in it. She was on the far side, reviewing her clipboard, making notes in handwriting too small to read from here. "She's doing exactly what she needs to do," Cole said. "That's the thing. She's not here for us. She's here for whatever these assessments are actually for. We're data." "Comforting," Tanner said. "Isn't meant to be." Cole reached for his water. "I'm saying she's not wasting energy on us beyond what the work requires. Everything else is irrelevant to her." Dukes looked at him for a moment. "When did you figure that out?" Cole thought about it. "About 6 seconds after she started talking," he said. "Give or take." The afternoon session moved into material that none of them had parameters for. Communications under jamming conditions. Cross had brought equipment that degraded their radio signals to the level of combat degradation, not training room degradation, and the difference was something you didn't appreciate until you were inside it. The 5 of them had to coordinate an extraction sequence using hand signals and a code set she briefed them on in 4 minutes and told them to retain. Cole retained it. This surprised him. He had always thought of himself as a physical operator, the man who moved fast and hit hard and trusted his chalk to handle the chess. But the code set stayed in his head with a precision that felt like something waking up, a capacity he'd owned but not exercised, or exercised for things that didn't feel like this. During the extraction sequence, Cross observed from the corner of the room with her clipboard and said nothing. At one critical point in the exercise, Cole made a call that deviated from the standard protocol. The standard protocol said secure the exit before the package. Cole's read of the layout, the simulated layout, the modular barriers and taped floor markings, suggested the exit was already secure and the package had a 40-second window that would close if they followed the standard sequence. He deviated. It worked. When the exercise ended, Cross said, "Mercer, Walk me through your decision at the split point. He did. Clean, complete, no editorializing. She made a note. The deviation was correct, she said. The standard protocol accounts for the median environment. You made a situational judgment that the median didn't apply. That is the ability we are looking for because it cannot be trained by repetition. It can only be trained by developing the quality of attention that lets you distinguish when the median doesn't apply. She closed her clipboard. Most operators never develop it. Some do, late. A few are born with it rough and spend their careers either sharpening it or ignoring it. She moved to the next exercise without indicating which category she thought Cole belonged to. He spent the rest of the afternoon wondering. At 21:45, 14 minutes before the scheduled end of the assessment block, Cross called them to the center of the room. They assembled, tired in the way of mental exertion rather than physical, the particular fatigue of having been observed closely and precisely for 14 hours, of having had every default and assumption surfaced and examined. That's the day, Cross said. Tomorrow's schedule will be sent through the same channel as this morning, same time, same facility. Expect it to look different than today. Yes, ma'am, 5 voices said. She started to turn toward her desk at the front of the room. Then she stopped. Didn't turn back. Just stopped. One thing, she said. The room waited. Every one of you made decisions today based on what you expected to find instead of what was actually in front of you. That's not a criticism. It is a structural tendency of trained operators in low-threat environments. The nervous system economizes by relying on templates. She paused. The problem is that the world doesn't present in templates. It presents in specifics. And the gap between your template and the specific reality in front of you is where most bad outcomes live. She turned back to her desk and picked up her clipboard. Get sleep, she said. You're going to need it. They filed toward the exit. Cole was last. He stopped near the door and looked back once, not meaning to, not planning it, just the reflexive final survey of a room before leaving it. Cross was at her desk with her back to them. Her hand was flat on the surface, not writing, not moving, head slightly forward, just holding herself in place in the way that certain people hold themselves in place when they are carrying something heavy, and the carrying has been going on for a very long time. Cole looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he went through the door. In the parking lot, Dukes fell into step beside him, and neither of them spoke until they were clear of the security perimeter. Tomorrow's different, Dukes said. Yeah. Cole could still see her there in his mind, at the desk, hand flat on the surface. Different how? I don't know. I just know it is. Cole nodded. They walked to the vehicle and Dukes got in the passenger side and Cole stood for a moment outside the driver's door with one hand on the roof, looking at the facility building against the dark sky. His secure phone vibrated in his pocket. He took it out and looked at the screen. Not the operations channel. A different channel. The General Base Notification System, which routed communications from multiple administrative sources and which he checked roughly twice a week. The notification was flagged. Priority and sourced from the base JAG office, which was not a source he had ever received priority notifications from. He opened it, read it again. The words didn't get clearer the second time. They stayed exactly as they were. Precise. Official. Carrying the particular weight of government language used for things that cannot be made to sound like what they are. Notice of inquiry. Reopened investigation into Operation Coastal Meridian, designated classified, relevant to actions and decisions of Naval Special Warfare Officer Cross AL during operational period, redacted. Inquiry convened under authority of redacted. Preliminary review scheduled, redacted. All personnel with knowledge of operational circumstances are subject to compulsory appearance. Cole stood in the parking lot with his phone in his hand and the night air cold against his face. And he understood, with a certainty that did not feel like inference, that whatever the day had started as, it was not what it was anymore. And that the woman standing alone at a desk inside Facility 7 had no idea what was already moving toward her. Cole read the notification a third time, standing in the parking lot with the cold working through his PT shirt, and then he put the phone in his pocket and got in the truck. Dukes looked at him. What? Nothing. Cole started the engine. The dashboard lit. Something I need to look into. That's not a nothing face. Drop it, Dukes. Dukes dropped it. Not because Cole told him to, but because he had enough operational experience to recognize the specific quality of a man who had just received information he needed to sit with before he could talk about it. You didn't push on that. You waited until the man came to you. Cole drove back to the barracks and parked and sat in the truck for 4 minutes after Dukes went inside. Operation Coastal Meridian. He didn't know the name. That was meaningful in itself. Cole had clearances that gave him access to most Joint Special Operations designations, even ones he hadn't participated in. The ones he didn't have access to weren't merely classified. They were classified in a particular way behind layers that indicated not sensitivity of location or target, but sensitivity of outcome. Missions where the official record and the actual record occupied different files in different systems. He pulled his phone back out and stared at the notification. Reopened investigation. Reopened meant it had been closed. Closed meant someone had decided at some point that it was finished, that whatever had happened during the operational period had been accounted for and filed and would stay filed. Reopened meant that decision had been reversed, which required either new evidence or new political motivation, and in his experience, the second was more common than the first. And Cross was at the center of it. He thought about her hand, flat on the desk, the way she'd been standing there holding herself still. He didn't know if she'd received the same notification. She was a contractor now, not active duty. Her official access to base communications would be filtered differently. The JAG's inquiry notice might not have hit her channel until morning, or it might have hit a personal address she kept checked, or she might already know, and the hand on the desk had nothing to do with it. He didn't know enough. He put the phone away and went inside. Sleep came in segments. Cole was awake at 0300, looking at the ceiling, at 0430, looking at the wall, and at 0600. He gave up the project entirely and went to the communal bathroom at the end of the barracks corridor and stood underwater as cold as the pipes could manage for 90 seconds, which was a technique he'd developed during Ranger School for situations when his nervous system needed interrupting. It worked, marginally. He was in the parking lot outside Facility 7 at 0740, 20 minutes before the rest of his chalk. Not tactical positioning. He didn't know what it was exactly. Just that he needed to be there before the day started, to have a moment in the space before it filled with what it was going to fill with. Cross's vehicle was already there. A gray pickup, civilian plate, backed into the far corner of the lot, the way people park when they've assessed every approach angle without thinking about it. Cole sat on the hood of his truck and drank his coffee and looked at the facility door. At 0751, it opened. Cross came out. She was in training attire, coffee in hand, clipboard under her arm. She was looking at her phone and she stopped walking the moment she cleared the doorway, not because she'd seen Cole, she hadn't looked up yet, but because something on the screen had pulled her attention completely. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she looked up, found him on the hood of his truck across the lot, held his gaze for 2 seconds that had more content in them than most conversations Cole had participated in. Then she went back inside. The door closed. Cole finished his coffee. So she knew. The second day started differently than the first. Cross skipped the morning assembly and the whiteboard. Instead, when the full chalk was gathered in the training room at 800, she was already moving through a scenario setup. Modular barriers repositioned, floor markings taped in a new configuration, 2 new instructors Cole hadn't seen before who were positioned at opposite corners of the room and watched everything without writing anything down. Hostile extraction, Cross said without preamble. 2-story structure, compromised entry point. Principal is on the second level. Egress is blocked at the primary route. You have 1 minute to designate roles and brief your approach. Clock starts now. She stepped back. Cole looked at his chalk. They had done hostile extraction in actual structures, in training facilities that cost the Army a significant amount of money to build for exactly that purpose, with proper cover angles and simulated fragmentation and opposing force who'd been briefed on the scenario and knew where the principal was. This was a training room with barriers and tape. It's a thinking exercise, Dukes said quietly. She's not grading the tactical, she's grading the decision-making. Agree. Cole looked at the layout. Tanner, you're on point. Briggs, second. Dukes, you pull rear security and watch the corner marked with the red tape. That's the compromised route. Treat it like it's contested. Vasquez, you're with me on the principle. We take the... He mapped the barriers with his eyes. Left approach, longer. but it gives us the corner angle she'd need if the egress was blown. That adds 40 seconds, Briggs said. Correct. The principal has 40 seconds of cover? We're going to have to find that out when we get there. Cole looked at Tanner. Move. They moved. Cross watched from outside the scenario perimeter, clipboard in hand, and said nothing. They completed the extraction in 4 minutes and 12 seconds, which was not fast, but it was clean. No coverage gaps. No moment where the approach angle put the principal in a crossfire position. At the end, Tanner reported contact at the compromised route. One of the silent instructors had moved to simulate an opposing force materializing, and Dukes made a call that Cole would not have made, which was to hold his position rather than engage and radio the contact to the element. Cross noted it. When the scenario ended, she walked the perimeter of the tape and said, Vasquez, talk me through the second-level approach. Vasquez did. He was 26, the youngest in the chalk, and had a tendency to speak faster when he was uncertain. He spoke at normal speed. Cole registered that as something. Cross asked 3 follow-up questions, each one drilling a layer deeper into Vasquez's reasoning. Not gotcha questions, the kind that were trying to find where understanding turned into assumption. She found the line on the 3rd question, and Vasquez found it too, and he stopped talking mid-sentence. Right there, Cross said. That's the edge of what you know. Write it down. Not because it's a failure, because knowing where your knowledge ends is a proficiency. Most operators don't know where their line is. You just found yours. Vasquez pulled out his notebook. Next scenario in 12 minutes, Cross said. Water and heads. By mid-morning, a pattern had established itself that none of them had been briefed on, but all of them had begun to feel Cross was not running parallel assessments. She was running a single continuous assessment across all 5 of them simultaneously, and the scenarios were connected to each other in ways that only became visible 2 or 3 exercises later. A decision made in the first scenario created a constraint that appeared in the 4th. A communication protocol established in the 2nd became the only available tool in the 5th. It was, Cole realized somewhere around the 3rd hour, not an assessment at all. It was a course. She was teaching them. The distinction mattered because courses had objectives and assessments only had outcomes, and an objective implied that Cross had a specific vision of what the 5 of them were supposed to look like on the far end of this process, which meant she'd designed this for them specifically rather than running a generic evaluation protocol. He didn't know what to do with that. He sat with it during the water break at 10:35 and found that it made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't precisely locate. Briggs sat down next to him on the floor with his water bottle and his neck still carrying the yellow-green bruise from the bar edge. You figure out what she's doing yet? Briggs said. Yeah. What? She's building something. Cole looked at the far side of the room where Cross was rearranging the scenario layout with one of the silent instructors. I don't know what, but it's not a 2-day assessment. Briggs drank. Chain of command know about this? Our chain of command set this up. Cole shook his head. Someone upstream of us is very comfortable with whatever this is. That doesn't bother you? Everything bothers me. That doesn't mean anything. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Then, she's good, Mercer. Cole looked at him. I know, Cole said. Not just, technically good. I mean the way she runs the room. I've been through SERE, Advanced JTAC, 3 Ranger assessment cycles. Briggs paused. I've never seen someone manage 5 Type A operators in a single training space without raising their voice once. Cole watched Cross reposition the last barrier. She was moving with the economy of someone who had done this 100 times. Not performing efficiency, just not wasting the motion. She doesn't need to raise her voice, Cole said. No, Briggs agreed. She doesn't. At noon, Cross called a 45-minute break and said they were free to use the facility's small mess area 2 corridors down. She did not join them. She stayed in the training room with her clipboard. They ate in the kind of quiet that happens when 5 men are processing the same thing, but none of them have the language for it yet. The mess area was small, 2 tables, a microwave, coffee that had been sitting since early morning and had become something geological. Dukes poured himself a cup anyway and looked at it suspiciously and drank it without complaint. She knows about the inquiry, Cole said. 4 heads came up. I saw her face when she came out this morning. She'd just read it. Cole set his fork down. She knew before we got in the room. How long has the inquiry been moving? Tanner asked. I don't know. The notification said reopened. If it was originally closed some years back, the reopen could have been in motion for weeks before the notice hit base channels. What's Coastal Meridian? Vasquez asked. He was the youngest but not the least experienced, and he asked questions without the self-consciousness some of the older operators had about appearing not to know things. I don't know, Cole said. My clearance level should cover most JSOC adjacent operations, and it doesn't show anything, which means it's either genuinely above my access or it's been scrubbed from the shared index. Scrubbed operations tend to be the ones where the outcomes were complicated, Dukes said. Or the ones where someone in the administration changed their mind about what happened, Briggs said. Silence. Cole looked at the table. He was thinking about something specific and trying to decide whether to say it. She lost someone, he said finally, during whatever operation this was. I don't know how I know that. The way she carries herself. There's a weight that's not just about training and not just about the job. Something she hasn't put down. Nobody argued with this. Rangers were not, as a population, particularly comfortable with emotional observation, but they were highly trained at reading people under pressure. And what Cole was describing was not sentiment, it was assessment. So she's being reinvestigated for an operation where someone died, Tanner said. That's my read. And whoever's running the inquiry wants to reframe what happened. Cole looked up. That's what reopened investigations usually are. Someone decided the original finding doesn't serve the current narrative. Duke set down his geological coffee. What do we do with that? Nothing yet. Cole picked his fork back up. We finish the day, we do the work. We see what tomorrow brings. And if the inquiry moves fast? Vasquez asked. Cole thought about her hand on the desk, about eyes that stayed calm in a bar after someone hit her, because calm was what she had instead of the things she'd traded away for it. Then we figure out what we know, he said, and whether it matters. The afternoon session ran harder than the morning. Cross introduced a new variable at 13:30, time compression. She ran the scenarios with half the standard planning window, which meant decisions that normally had 60 seconds of deliberation had 30, and decisions that had 30 had 12, and at least one choice point in each scenario had a window she described as immediate, and did not define further, which meant it was whatever the situation required. Cole discovered something about himself in the fourth hour of this. Under compressed time, he stopped second-guessing. It wasn't that the second-guessing went away, it compressed itself into the decision rather than following after it. His read of the room, the layout, the variables got faster without getting less accurate, as if the pressure were burning off the overhead, leaving only the core processing. He made 3 consecutive calls that Cross noted without comment, and the noting without comment meant they were correct because incorrect decisions in Cross's room got addressed immediately and openly. But the 5th call, he got wrong. He misread the coverage angle on a secondary entry point, a gap in the barrier arrangement that he'd mapped correctly, but then failed to update when Briggs shifted position 90 seconds into the scenario. The shift was small. The gap it created was not. When the silent instructor materialized at the entry point, Cole was looking the wrong direction. Hold, Cross said. Everyone stopped. Mercer. She was already walking the perimeter. Where's your secondary entry coverage? Cole turned, saw the gap, saw Briggs' position. Briggs shifted at the 90-second mark, Cole said. I didn't update. Why not? I was focused on the principal's movement. You were focused on the problem in front of you, Cross said, to the exclusion of the problem that was developing behind you. She stopped at the gap and gestured with her clipboard at the angle. In a real structure, this entry point becomes lethal at the 90-second mark. You have 7 people relying on your spatial awareness. She looked at him. What else were you tracking? 3 coverage zones, 1 comms loop, 2 movement timelines for Vasquez and Tanner. That's 4 active tracks. Yes. What's your maximum under full cognitive load? Cole did not answer immediately, which was itself an answer. I don't know, he said. It was the first time in his professional life he had said those 3 words in that sequence to an instructor without feeling that they cost him something. What surprised him was that they didn't, or rather they cost him something, but the cost felt like the right cost, the cost of accuracy instead of performance. Cross held his gaze for a moment. Find out, she said. That's the first question of this assessment, and you just asked it. She moved to reset the scenario. Cole stood in his coverage position and thought about how strange it was that the first honest answer he'd given in a training environment in years had come out of him in a room run by a woman whose lip he was indirectly responsible for. He didn't examine that thought for long. There was another scenario starting in 40 seconds. At 16:15, Cross paused the training. Not a break. Something had interrupted the flow of the room. Cole felt it before he understood the cause, the way you feel a change in air pressure before you hear the thing that caused it. Cross had been moving through the room with her clipboard, and she stopped at the far wall and stood there, and the hand that wasn't holding the clipboard was pressed flat against the wall's surface. The same gesture. The hand, flat, pressing against something. She stood like that for 12 seconds. Cole counted. Then she turned back to the room. "Take 5, she said. Scenario set up for the next block. She walked out of the training room into the corridor beyond. The door didn't close all the way. Cole waited 30 seconds and then crossed the room and stood near the door. Not to listen. To be there, in case that was what was required. He heard nothing useful. 30 feet down the corridor, the sound of a phone call being taken. Her voice, not carrying the words, just the tone, flat, controlled, with the particular cadence of someone who was being told something they had been expecting and had been hoping not to receive. The call was short. When she came back, she was carrying herself the same as before, which was its own kind of information. Whatever the call had been, she had filed it in a location that was not accessible during working hours. She picked up her clipboard without looking at anyone. 3 more scenarios before end of day, she said. Let's use the time. Cole used the time. They all did. The last 3 scenarios of the day were the most complex Cross had run them through, multi-stage, with interdependencies that required the chalk to operate as a continuous unit rather than 5 individuals sharing space, and with decision points that required Cole to choose between options where neither was clearly correct and the quality of the choice was in how it was made rather than what it was. He tracked 5 elements simultaneously in the final scenario. Not perfectly. The 5th element was rough at the edges, required active effort to maintain alongside the others, and at one point he lost it for 6 seconds and had to rebuild from the last confirmed position. But he tracked 5. Cross noted it. When the day ended at 21:45, the same time as the night before, she held the chalk in the room for the after action, same as before. She worked through each scenario with the same directness, the same absence of hierarchy in her criticism. She corrected Briggs and Tanner in the same breath as Cole and Vasquez. She found 2 things Dukes had done in the 3rd scenario that she described as textbook, and she described them in a flat tone that made them feel like facts rather than compliments. At the end, she closed her clipboard. "Tomorrow is different," she said. The chalk waited. "Tomorrow we run live force on force." She looked at the room. Full opposing force, real-time decision-making, no scenario cards, no pre-briefed layouts. You will not know the objective until 30 seconds before start. You will have the tools and the people in this room and nothing else. A pause. "If you want to know what this week has been building toward, tomorrow is it." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said. The others echoed it. Cross nodded and turned toward her desk. Cole moved toward the exit with the rest of the chalk and was almost through the door when Dukes caught his arm and nodded back into the room. Cross was not at her desk. She was standing at the mirrored wall looking at her reflection. Not the way people look at their reflections in passing. Looking at it the way people look at someone they are trying to have a conversation with. Her hand was at her side. The phone was in it. The screen was dark. Cole pulled his attention away and went through the door. In the parking lot, the evening air was cold, and the sky had cleared from the previous night's storm, and the stars were out over the Pacific in the way they get out here when the marine layer lifts, dense, specific, too close seeming for comfort. Dukes walked beside him and said nothing. Vasquez and Tanner said their goodnights and went to the other vehicle. Briggs lingered a moment near Cole's truck. "Tomorrow," Briggs said. It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow," Cole confirmed. Briggs nodded and walked away. Dukes got in the passenger seat and Cole stood at the driver's door and took out his phone. He had 3 messages from the operations sergeant that he hadn't opened. He opened them. The first was administrative. The second was a follow-up to the first. The third was not from the operations sergeant. It was from a number he didn't recognize. with a 571 area code that he did recognize as a Virginia exchange favored by certain government offices that preferred not to announce themselves through official channels. The message was 5 words. Inquiry moves Thursday. Be ready. Cole read it twice. Then he screenshotted it and put his phone back in his pocket. Thursday was 3 days away. He got in the truck and started the engine. "What's Thursday?" Dukes said. Cole looked at him. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to." Dukes looked out the windshield. "You've been carrying something since last night. You going to tell me what it is, or do I have to wait until it affects the mission?" Cole pulled out of the parking spot. The facility building moved past the window, its concrete face gray against the dark sky. "Coastal Meridian," Cole said. Dukes was quiet for a moment. "I've heard that name." Cole looked at him. "Where?" 3, maybe 4 years ago. One of the guys in 5th group, we did a joint rotation together. He mentioned it the way guys mention things they aren't supposed to mention. Oblique, after too much coffee, then never again. Dukes shifted in his seat. He said it was a maritime direct action op. Small team. Target was a network node, mid-tier facilitator, Eastern Mediterranean operational zone. He paused. He said it went wrong in a way that nobody wanted to put words to. How wrong? The kind of wrong where the official record says it was clean, and the people who were there don't talk about it. Dukes looked at the road. "I didn't push him on it. You learn not to push." "Did he mention names?" "No." A pause. "He mentioned that the team lead was a woman. Special warfare. That she made a call that..." He couldn't finish the sentence. He just said she made a call, and people at the top didn't like the call, and then 2 years later it turned out the people at the top had been wrong, and by then nobody wanted to revisit it. Cole drove. The base lights faded behind them. The highway stretched out toward Black Ridge and the strip of civilian bars and late-night diners, and the kind of ordinary life that existed on the periphery of military installations, like a reminder of what the missions were theoretically protecting. "They're going to come after her," Cole said. "Sounds like they're already coming after her. I mean publicly." Cole kept his eyes on the road. That kind of inquiry doesn't reopen unless someone's building something. You don't reopen a closed classified op just to confirm the original finding. You reopen it because you need a different finding. Dukes said nothing for a long time. Then, "Who sent you the message?" "I don't know. But someone knows we're adjacent to this. Someone knows we're in her training facility." Cole's hands were steady on the wheel. "That's enough to make us relevant." Dukes turned in his seat. In the dark of the truck cab, his face was its usual unreadable self, which meant he was thinking hard and not yet done. "What do you want to do?" It wasn't an offer, it was a real question. The kind Dukes asked when he was prepared to go either direction and wanted to know which direction they were going before he committed. Cole thought about the bar. The coin. The hand on the desk, and the hand on the wall, and the voice on the phone that she'd kept level, even though the call was doing what it was doing to her. "I want to know what actually happened," Cole said. "During Coastal Meridian, the real account, not the scrubbed one. That kind of information doesn't move through official channels." "No." Cole signaled for the turn onto base. "It moves through people who were there." Dukes looked out the window. "Your guy from 5th group," Cole said. "You still have contact?" "Maybe. Maybe yes or maybe no." A silence that ran for several seconds. "Maybe yes," Dukes said. Cole nodded. He pulled through the gate and showed his ID to the sentry and drove toward the barracks. The stars were still out, the clear sky still doing its too-close thing over the water. He was thinking about the final scenario of the day. The 5th element he'd held, rough and effortful, but held. The moment Cross had said "find out," and he had understood it as something other than a correction. He was thinking about what it meant that she was still in that building, standing at the mirrored wall. And he was thinking about Thursday, 3 days away, and what kind of men they were going to be when it arrived. He parked in the barracks lot and turned off the engine and sat in the dark for a moment. "Dukes." "Yeah." "Tomorrow we run the force on force. Whatever else is moving, we give her everything we have in that room." Dukes was already reaching for the door handle. That was never in question. He got out. Cole sat alone in the truck for another minute, the engine ticking as it cooled. the base around him quiet in the deep night way that military installations get quiet. Not silent, but organized, breathing in a rhythm that had its own logic. He pulled out his phone and opened the screenshot of the 5-word message. Inquiry moves Thursday. Be ready. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he locked his phone and got out of the truck and went inside. The alarm went off at 5:30 and Cole was already awake. He'd been awake since 4:20, lying in the dark with the kind of alert stillness that wasn't rest, but wasn't wasted either. The kind where the mind runs its own drills while the body stays horizontal. He'd been thinking about the force on force, about Thursday, about Duke's contact in 5th Group, and whether that thread would produce anything useful in time to matter. About the 5-word message from the 571 number that he still hadn't been able to source. He got up, dressed in the dark so as not to wake Dukes, and went to the communal bathroom and stood in front of the mirror for a moment before turning on the water. He looked older than he had 3 days ago. He didn't know if that was real or the mirror or the light. He turned on the water and washed his face and went to find coffee. The chalk assembled in the Facility 7 parking lot at 07:45 without being told to. Nobody had scheduled a pre-brief. Nobody had organized it. They arrived in the same 15-minute window because that was the kind of unit they were, the kind that moved toward the work without needing the machinery of procedure to push them. Vasquez had brought a thermos and poured without being asked. Briggs stood at the edge of the lot with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the building with the focused calm of someone who had decided how they were going to approach the day and was now simply waiting for the day to begin. Duke stood beside Cole and said quietly, "Made contact last night. He's thinking. When will he know?" He said today. Maybe tonight. Cole nodded. He drank his coffee. The marine layer was back this morning, lower than yesterday, sitting on the base like something that hadn't decided to leave yet. The facility door was closed. Cross's truck was in the corner. At 0800 exactly the door opened and one of the silent instructors came out and gestured them in without speaking. The training room had been transformed. Not reconfigured, transformed. The modular barriers were gone. In their place, the room had been divided by a series of heavy curtains suspended from ceiling rails, creating a network of corridors and blind corners that hadn't existed yesterday. The floor markings were new, more complex, covering areas that had been bare mat the day before. There were props Cole hadn't seen before, a table with objects on it, a door frame standing unsupported in the center of one of the created corridors, what appeared to be a communications rig on a folding table with a radio handset and a junction box trailing cables to somewhere behind the curtains. The 2 original silent instructors were there, and 3 others Cole hadn't seen before, 5 total, in opposing force gear. Neutral colors, no insignia, the kind of unmarked tactical equipment that said not which unit but which tier. Cross was standing in the open area near the communications rig. She was wearing the same training attire as the previous days, but something about this morning was different, and it took Cole a moment to identify what it was. She had her sleeves rolled back. On her left forearm, running from the inside of the wrist partway up toward the elbow, was a scar that wasn't surgical. Not the clean line of an incision. The uneven texture of something that had happened fast and in a context where aesthetics were not the concern. She had never had her sleeves rolled back before. Cole didn't look at it. He moved his eyes to her face and kept them there. "Stand in," she said. They arranged themselves in the open area in front of her. The 5 opposing force personnel were distributed through the curtained corridors behind her, invisible, audible, only as the occasional slight shift of material. "Today's exercise has no scenario card," Cross said. "No pre-brief, no layout overview, no designated roles. At the start signal, you will have 30 seconds to survey the environment, designate your own roles, and communicate your plan to your element. At 31 seconds, the exercise begins, regardless of whether you're ready." She looked at the chalk one face at a time, the same systematic survey she'd used since the first morning. "The objective is in the room. You will identify it when you find it. The opposing force has 5 personnel. They know the layout. You don't." A pause. "This is as close to the real thing as we can build in a training space. Treat it accordingly." "Rules of engagement?" Briggs asked. "Graduated contact. No strikes to the head. Submission holds are permitted. If an OP, for calls halt, disengage immediately and move to the next contact point." She looked at him. They are not going to go easy on you. I want that understood. Understood, Briggs said. Questions. Nobody spoke. 30 seconds starts when I say go. Cross looked at the room. Go. Cole was already moving. 28 seconds. That was what he actually used of the 30. 2 seconds lost to the first step of the survey, which was standing still and mapping what was visible before trying to process it. A practice that ran counter to the instinct to immediately move and cover ground, but that Cross had demonstrated across the previous 2 days to produce better spatial modeling. He stood and looked and built the map, and then moved through it at speed. The curtain corridors were not random. They had a logic. He could see it in the way the ceiling rails were arranged, which produced a network that had entry and exit points and 2 positions that would function as choke points if the opposing force used them correctly. The communications rig was positioned at the far end of the space from the door, which meant it was either a decoy or the objective or both. Tanner, right corridor. Move slow. Watch the first blind corner at the T. There's an OP for angle there. Cole was already designating without preamble, and the chalk was already moving because that was what 3 days of Cross's training had produced in them, the capacity to act on designation without needing it confirmed. Briggs, left corridor, same speed. Dukes, stay fluid. 3rd corridor when it opens. You're my depth coverage. Vasquez, you're with me. We're going for the comms rig. Why the comms rig? Vasquez asked. They were moving. Because it's the only thing in this room they brought here specifically. Everything else is the room. That's the objective. They entered the curtain network. The first contact came on the right corridor where Cole had said it would come. He heard the brief physical exchange, the sound of Tanner making contact with something, a muffled grunt that could have been either of them, and then Tanner's voice saying clear, moving, which meant he was upright and functional, and then nothing from that corridor for 30 seconds, which was either very good or very bad, and Cole filed it as unknown and kept moving. The second contact was on Cole and Vasquez, which he had not anticipated in terms of timing. They were 8 feet from the communications rig when an opposing force came through a curtain gap at his left that he hadn't clocked as a gap. It had been a fold, and a fold and a gap looked the same from the front. And Cole's reaction time was what it was, which was faster than most and slower than it needed to be by about half a second. The OP-4 was bigger than the training room instructors from the previous days. Not ostentatiously, not the kind of size that announced itself, but the functional size of someone who had been working in close quarters environments for years and had developed the specific musculature of that work. He went for Cole's right arm and got most of it. Cole went with the grab rather than against it, the way Cross had demonstrated on the bar stool 3 nights ago, though he hadn't known then that he was watching technique. He turned inside the grab and lost 2 seconds doing it wrong before getting it right, and in those 2 seconds Vasquez had reached the communications rig and was reading what was on the table and calling it back. Laptop in a case. Case has a combination. There's a number sequence on a card next to the radio. Memorize the sequence, Cole said through the physical effort of managing the grab. We may need it. He finished the engagement, not cleanly. The OP-4's elbow connected with his shoulder on the disengage and would leave a bruise that he'd feel for a week, and came clear and moved to Vasquez's position. The number sequence was 6 digits. Vasquez read it back twice. Cole confirmed it. That's the combination for the case, Cole said. You think? The card is next to the lock, not the radio. It's for whoever finds this, not whoever's operating it. Try it. Vasquez tried it. The case opened. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Cole took it and unfolded it and read it. It was a set of grid coordinates and a single line of text. Element located. Confirm extraction route to primary egress. Simulated principal location, Cole said. They've given us the grid. We need to get from here to the egress with the element. Vasquez, close the case, take it with you. Treat it as sensitive material. Copy. Dukes materialized from the 3rd corridor, slightly out of breath, with a fresh scuff on the forearm that was going to join Briggs' neck bruise in the Chalk's collective bruise inventory. 3rd corridor has 2 OP-4 and a blind T intersection. I've got one contained. They called halt. He's disengaged. The other one peeled off toward the back. Where's the back exit? Doesn't have one, dead end. Then he's repositioning. He'll be at our egress. Cole folded the coordinate sheet. Where are Tanner and Briggs? Tanner's in the right corridor. Briggs went deep left. I haven't heard Briggs in 90 seconds. Find him. Dukes went back into the curtains. Cole and Vasquez moved toward the primary egress, the training room's main entrance, which was designated on the floor markings as the extraction point. They moved along the left wall of the curtain network, Cole in front, Vasquez a step behind and offset, and Cole was tracking three things simultaneously while trying to build in a fourth, which was the likely position of the repositioned OP4 from Dukes' third corridor. He found the OP4 before the OP4 found them by 2 steps, which was the margin that matters. The exchange was brief and rough, and Cole came out of it with his shoulder screaming from the earlier elbow and a new problem in his left knee that was going to need ice and wasn't going to get it until the exercise was over. But he came out of it upright and with Vasquez intact beside him and the egress in sight. Tanner appeared from the right corridor with a split lip from somewhere in his portion of the exercise and took position on Cole's right without commentary. Dukes came through the curtains from the direction of the third corridor with Briggs 2 steps behind him. Briggs was holding his forearm against his midsection, the posture of someone who had taken contact to the arm and was assessing whether it was functional or structural damage. "Can you move?" Cole said. "I'm moving," Briggs said. They reached the egress together. Cross was standing just beyond the training room entrance, in the open area they'd started from, with her clipboard and her rolled-back sleeves and the expression of someone who had been watching through the entire exercise by means Cole hadn't identified. Cameras somewhere, or the silent observer network she'd been running through the 2 days prior. She looked at them the way a mechanic looks at an engine they've been listening to, assessing the sound of it, not the appearance. "Halt," she said. They stopped. She looked at each of them. Registered Tanner's split lip, Briggs' arm, Cole's shoulder posture, Vasquez's breathing. "Time," she said to someone behind her. 11:42, a voice said. One of the silent instructors. She wrote it on her clipboard. "Objective secured?" "Yes, ma'am." Cole held up the coordinate sheet. "Combination cases with Vasquez." She nodded. "After action in 15 minutes. Briggs, medical evaluation first. There's an aid kit on the table in the corridor, and Instructor Lim will look at the arm." "It's fine," Briggs said. "Instructor Lim will look at the arm," Cross repeated, with the particular patience of someone who has said something once, meant it completely, and is waiting for the other person to catch up. Briggs went with Instructor Lim. Well, the after-action for the force-on-force ran 40 minutes, which was twice as long as any of the previous after-actions. Cross was methodical about it in a way she hadn't been before. Granular, specific, working through the exercise in a sequence that tracked not just what had happened, but the decision tree that produced each outcome. She had a way of asking questions that revealed, in the process of the answer, something the responder hadn't known they'd been doing. Vasquez discovered that he'd been running a backup navigational track throughout the exercise without consciously initiating it. Tanner discovered that his contact in the right corridor had taken 32 seconds longer than it should have because he'd been operating on a priority assessment from day one that no longer matched the current objective, and he hadn't updated it. Cole discovered that he'd tracked 6 elements simultaneously during the extraction phase. He knew it while it was happening but hadn't cataloged it. Cross pulled it out of him in the after-action, question by question, making him articulate the reconstruction until they both arrived at the same count. 6, she said. 6, Cole confirmed. She wrote it on her clipboard. Your ceiling on day 1 was an unknown, she said. Your floor appears to be 5. That's a significant operational profile. She capped the marker. It also means you've been working below capacity for most of your career. Cole didn't respond to that. There was no response that wasn't either defensive or sycophantic, and both were wrong for the room. Cross moved on. Briggs returned from the corridor with his arm wrapped, and a bruise developing above the wrap that had the yellow-green depth of something that was going to look significantly worse by tomorrow. Instructor Lim had determined it was soft tissue, not structural. Briggs sat back in his position in the semicircle without commenting on it. At the end of the after-action, Cross stood in front of the group and did something she hadn't done in the 2 previous days. She paused. Not the processing pause she used before answers. A genuine pause, with a quality to it that was different. A door between one thing and the next, and something on the far side of it that she was deciding whether to bring through. This block ends today, she said. The formal assessment portion is complete. What I will tell you is that you passed, and the word passed doesn't adequately describe what I'm looking at, but but it's the word the contract uses, so I'll use it. She looked at the floor briefly and then back at them. Tomorrow we move into a different phase. Application of what we've been building. Real-world simulation with higher stakes and less scaffolding. I'll have the brief ready by 0600 tomorrow. What kind of real-world simulation? Tanner asked. The kind that has a specific operational scenario attached to it, rather than a generic training construct. She picked up her clipboard. It's need to know, and you'll know tomorrow. She was turning toward her desk when Cole said, Commander Cross. She turned back. The chalk was watching him. He had not planned to speak. The words came out of a decision he'd been making for 3 days without knowing it. Before tomorrow, he said. There's something we should talk about. The room was quiet. The instructors in the corners were quiet. Outside, the marine layer sat on the windows and made the afternoon flat and gray. My office, Cross said. 5 minutes. Her office was a small room off the main corridor that had a desk, 2 chairs, a wall-mounted display that was currently dark, and nothing personal. No photographs. No commendations on the wall. The desk had a laptop and a folder and a coffee cup that had a small chip on the handle. The chip was the most human thing in the room. Cross sat behind the desk and Cole sat across from it, and she looked at him with the same directness she used in the training room, which was its own kind of disconcerting. Coastal Meridian, Cole said. Something happened in her face. Not much. A compression, very brief, that traveled from her eyes downward and was gone before it fully arrived. But it was real. Where did you hear that name? She said. Notification came through base channels 2 nights ago. JAG office. Flagged priority. He held her gaze. Reopened inquiry. Your name attached. She was quiet. I don't know what the operation was, Cole said. I know the designation doesn't show in my access level, which tells me what tier it was filed at. I know someone sent me a message from a Virginia number telling me the inquiry moves Thursday. He paused. I'm telling you this because you have a right to know the timeline is moving faster than whatever you've been briefed. Cross had both hands flat on the desk. The scar on her left forearm was visible in the room's flat light. Who sent the message? She said. I don't know. The number doesn't source. A silence that ran for several seconds. The inquiry was supposed to open in 4 weeks, she said. I've had counsel in contact with the JAG's office. She looked at the desk surface, briefly. 4 weeks became 3. Now you're telling me 3 became Thursday. That's what I have. She exhaled. Not a sigh, a controlled release of pressure, the kind that was deliberate rather than incidental. Can I ask what happened during the operation? Cole said. She looked at him. Not as an operator looking for intelligence, he said. As a person who is trying to understand what's being used against you. Cross was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Cole thought she wasn't going to answer, and he was already preparing the mental architecture of a graceful withdrawal. An acknowledgement, a nod, a departure that left the door open without pushing through it. Then she said, his name was Daniel Mercer. Cole went still. Not because the name surprised him, and it did surprise him, in a way that was going to need examining, but because the quality of her voice when she said it was different from anything he'd heard from her in 3 days of training. Not softer, more exposed. The way a raw edge is more exposed than a smooth one. He was my partner, Cross said. We worked together for 6 years. Maritime Ops, Eastern Med, 1 rotation in the Pacific. He was the best operator I have ever worked alongside. She said this the way people say factual things, without decoration. Coastal Meridian was a direct action mission. Maritime interdiction, small boat, high-value network node. 6-person element. Daniel and I were the primary contact pair. Cole waited. Something was wrong with the intelligence from the start. The network node we were targeting should have had 2 armed guards at the primary access point. There were 9. The boat configuration didn't match the surveillance imagery from the pre-op package, and there was a secondary vessel that wasn't in the brief at all. She paused. A good commander calls that and stands down, waits for updated intelligence. The problem was that we had a 90-minute operational window, and command was pushing hard to execute. There had been 4 previous attempts on this target that had all missed. This one had political priority. And command was aware of the discrepancies? I reported them. On the radio with Tanner, not your Tanner, a different one. On comms. I reported 3 specific discrepancies from the pre-op package and asked for authorization to abort. She looked at her hands on the desk. Authorization came back affirmative. Execute. They told you to go. They told me to go. Cole absorbed this. Daniel was on point, Cross said. Secondary vessel initiated contact at 6 minutes. It wasn't in the brief. It hadn't been positioned as a threat, and it opened fire before we'd established contact with the primary target. She paused. I made a call. I redirected 2 members of the element to the secondary vessel and continued the primary approach with Daniel and 1 other operator. It was the right tactical call. The secondary vessel was the greater immediate threat to the element as a whole, but it left Daniel undermanned on the primary approach. By 1 person, yes. She looked up. He knew the call. He confirmed it on comms. He continued the approach. Her voice was level, precise. The way precision becomes a mechanism for carrying something that would otherwise be too heavy. The primary target had a 3rd access point that wasn't on any of our imagery. Daniel came around the bow and walked into it. Cole said nothing. He died before I could reach him, Cross said. I finished the objective. We extracted the element. I wrote the after-action report with exactly what happened. The discrepancies I reported, the authorization command gave me, the secondary vessel, the 3rd access point, the tactical call, the outcome. And command. Command's version of events omitted the radio exchange about the discrepancies. Her hands were still flat on the desk, perfectly still. Their record showed I reported the target as consistent with the pre-op package and requested authorization on that basis. No discrepancies, no pushback. Clean authorization, clean execution, 1 casualty attributable to hostile action at the primary target. Cole stared at her. They covered it, he said. They covered the part that made them look like they'd sent a 6-person element into a compromised operation with bad intelligence because they were under political pressure to close the target. She said this without heat. The heat had burned out a long time ago, apparently, and what was left was the bare structure of the facts. The inquiry now is because someone on the political side has decided that the narrative has more use as a weapon than a cover. There are hearings coming. People who were on command that night don't want to be the ones in the chair when those hearings ask why the operation was executed with known intelligence discrepancies. So they need it to be your fault. They need the call to be my fault, the tactical call to redirect the element. She met his eyes, which, removed from the context of the discrepancies I reported, looks like I took resources off Daniel's approach for a secondary objective, which looks like I prioritized the mission over my partner's life. The room was quiet. Cole looked at the scar on her forearm and thought about what maritime direct action looked like at close range and what close-range contact looked like on a person's body afterward. There's a radio transcript, he said. Your report of the discrepancies. Someone on comms received it. The transcript was designated classified at a level that effectively removes it from inquiry discovery. My counsel has been trying to get access for 3 weeks. Cross looked at the dark wall display. We have until Thursday, apparently. What does your counsel say? My counsel says the case is strong if we can get the transcript in a week without it. She paused. The things that could get the transcript are things I can't do from inside this facility with a contractor badge. Cole leaned forward slightly. What things? She looked at him. The look held for a long moment, carrying the weight of an assessment she was running on him in real time. The same assessment he'd felt in the training room, the same quality of observation, except this time it wasn't operational capacity she was evaluating. The comms log from that night exists in 2 places, she said carefully. The official record, which is classified and locked, and the personal log of the communications officer who was on the radio that night, which is not official, not classified, and which that officer has been sitting on for 4 years because nobody asked him for it. Because nobody knew it existed. Because nobody knew it existed. Cole looked at the chip in the handle of her coffee cup. Who is he? Cole said. A pause. Retired, Cross said. He lives in Oregon now. He spent 3 years trying to get someone to pay attention to what he had. Nobody did. Eventually he stopped trying. But he still has it. As far as I know. As far as you know, Cole repeated. Or as far as you know for certain. Cross held his gaze. He called me 8 months ago, she said. He told me he still had it, and he asked me what I wanted him to do with it. I told him to sit on it until I needed it. She paused. I needed it 3 weeks ago when my counsel filed the initial response. By then, I couldn't reach him. Cole's jaw tightened. Can't reach him, or he's not answering? Not answering. Her voice stayed level. People get tired. 4 years is a long time to be holding something nobody wants to take from you. Cole stood up from the chair. His shoulder protested, and he ignored it. I need his name and his last known address, he said. Cross looked at him from behind the desk with an expression that was doing several things at once, none of them simple. Why? She said. Because I know people in Oregon, and because Dukes has a contact in 5th Group who remembers the name of the operation, which means there are more people with pieces of this than you know about. He looked at her directly. And because you reported those discrepancies. You asked them to abort, and they sent you in anyway, and a man died, and his name was Daniel Mercer. He stopped. Whatever else is complicated about this, that part isn't. Cross was quiet. Then she opened the folder on her desk, turned through 2 pages, and wrote something on the bottom edge of the 3rd page. Tore it off. Slid it across the desk. Cole picked it up. A name. An address in a town he'd never heard of on the Oregon coast. His name is Walsh, Cross said. He's 71. He lost his wife 2 years ago, and I don't know what that's done to him. She looked at the torn edge of the paper. He's not going to want to be involved. He's already involved, Cole said. He just doesn't know it matters yet. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. At the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. Looked at the door frame, the plain, unpainted concrete of it. Daniel Mercer, he said. Yes. Any relation to your father's brother, Cross said quietly. Your uncle. Yes. Cole stood at the door frame. Outside in the corridor, the facility was quiet. One of the instructors passed the end of the hall without looking in. Somewhere in the training room, the curtains were still hanging from the ceiling rails, and the communications rig was still on the table, and the coordinate sheet was still folded in Cole's jacket pocket from the exercise. He stood there for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went into this corridor and pulled the office door shut behind him, carefully, with both hands, the way you close a door on something that needs to stay where it is while you figure out what to do next. Dukes was in the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, waiting. He took one look at Cole's face. Tell me, Dukes said. Cole looked at him. The paper was in his jacket pocket. Thursday was 2 days away. Walsh was on the Oregon coast with a personal comms log that nobody had asked for in 4 years, and the man whose life it could have cleared was dead, and the woman who might have saved him was sitting behind a desk with a chip in her coffee cup and a scar on her forearm, and a government inquiry that was moving faster than her counsel could respond to. I need to make some calls, Cole said, and then you need to make yours. Dukes uncrossed his arms. When? Tonight, Cole said. Right now. They walked down the corridor together, their footsteps even and unhurried, the facility's flat light following them to the exit, and behind them the training room waited in its curtained silence, the walls still holding the morning's work. The calls started at 1940. Cole sat on the edge of his bunk with the door to the barracks room closed, and his personal phone in one hand and his secure device in the other, and worked through the list he'd built in his head during the drive back. Dukes was at the desk with his laptop open and a legal pad beside it that already had 6 names on it, 3 of which had lines through them. The first call Cole made was to his battalion S2, a sharp and perpetually tired captain named Reyes, who picked up on the second ring and listened without interrupting while Cole explained what he needed, which was access to personnel records for a retired naval communications officer named Walsh, and any cross-reference that put Walsh in the Eastern Mediterranean operational theater during the relevant period. Reyes was quiet for a moment after Cole finished. That's an odd ask, Reyes said. I know. Is this related to the assessment you've been running at Facility 7? Tangentially. Tangentially, Reyes repeated, with the tone of a man who had been doing intelligence work long enough to know that tangentially was the word people used when the actual answer was something they couldn't say on an unsecured line. Give me 2 hours. Cole thanked him and ended the call. Dukes was already on his phone. The conversation Cole could hear from across the room was the kind that had long silences on one side and short, careful sentences on the other. The rhythm of a man asking something from someone who wasn't sure yet whether they wanted to give it. Dukes had his elbow on the desk and his hand over his eyes, the posture of someone who was working hard not to push too fast. "I know," Dukes said into the phone. "I know it's been a while. I'm not asking you to go on record. I'm asking you to tell me what you told me before on a recorded line. Just no. Listen, this isn't for us. This is for a woman who reported discrepancies before the op and got told to execute anyway and has been carrying the outcome for 4 years while the people who gave the order write a different version of what happened." A pause. "Her name is Cross. She was the team lead. She made the right call and her partner died, and now she's got an inquiry moving Thursday that's going to pin it on her if we can't." Another pause, longer. "Yeah, okay, yes, I'll give you the number." He read out a number and ended the call. "Well," Cole said, "he'll think about it." Duke set the phone down on the legal pad, which with him means he'll call back in an hour and say yes. He's not a person who says no to things that matter. He just needs to get there himself. Cole looked at the door. Through it, the barracks corridor was quiet, the end-of-day sounds of a company settling in for the night. Boots on linoleum, a door closing somewhere, the distant bass of someone's music through the wall. "She told me Daniel was my uncle," Cole said. Dukes went very still. "Your father's brother." "Yeah." Dukes looked at the legal pad. The 6 names, the 3 crossed out. "Does she know who you are? I mean, did she know before you told her about the inquiry?" "I don't know." Cole looked at his hands. "She ran her assessment the same as she would have if I'd been anyone. She didn't treat me different from the rest of the chalk. Maybe she didn't connect it. Maybe." Cole thought about the systematic way she cataloged things, the notes on the clipboard, the questions that peeled back exactly to the edge of what you knew. Or maybe she connected it on day 1 and decided it was irrelevant to the work. Which would mean she compartmentalized the fact that the nephew of the man she lost was sitting in her training room. Which would mean she's better at compartmentalizing than I will ever be, Cole said. Dukes was quiet for a moment. "Did you know him?" Dukes said. "Your uncle." "No. He was gone before I was old enough to understand the going. My father mentioned him twice that I can remember. Military, he said, died in service. The details never came." Cole looked at the door again. "I don't even know if my father knows what operation it was." "You going to tell him?" Cole didn't answer that. He picked up the secure device and opened the message from the 571 number again, the 5 words, and stared at them. "I need to know who sent this," he said. "The number doesn't trace. Virginia Exchange, government office that doesn't advertise. They knew I was in the assessment facility, which means they have access to contractor assignment records or base access logs. Either puts them inside the installation's information environment." Cole set the phone down. "Someone in the building wants this to come out. Or someone in the building wants to know what we're going to do when it comes at us," Dukes said. Cole looked at him. "There are 2 reasons to send a 5-word warning to a sergeant first class who has no official role each in a JAG inquiry," Dukes said. "The first is that you want him to do something with the warning. The second is that you want to see what he does with it, so you can decide whether he's useful or a problem." Cole sat with that. "Either way," Dukes said, "someone's watching how we respond. Then we respond correctly. Defined correctly. We find Walsh," Cole said. "We get the transcript. We get it to Cross's counsel before Thursday." He picked the secure phone back up. "Everything else is noise." Reyes called back at 2118. "Walsh Raymond T.," Reyes said. "Retired 2019 Naval Communications Specialist, E7. Eastern Mediterranean Theater Rotation, 18 months. Relevant period matches your timeline. His service record is clean. Commendations for operational communication support. 1 formal incident report that was resolved at the command level and flagged as administrative." A pause. "The incident report is sealed. I can't get into it. But the fact that it exists and the timing of it put it squarely in the window you're interested in. The incident report is the complaint he filed about the radio exchange," Cole said. "That would be consistent." Reyes was quiet for a moment. "Cole, I need to understand what we're doing here. We're trying to reach a retired communications specialist before Thursday. You're trying to pull evidence into a JAG inquiry from outside official channels. That's a thing with consequences. I know. If the evidence turns out to support the correct finding, the consequences are manageable. If it muddies the water or is deemed improperly obtained, you are looking at potential interference with a military judicial proceeding. The correct finding is that Commander Cross reported 3 specific intelligence discrepancies before the operation, and command authorized execution anyway. If there's a sealed incident report and a personal comms log from the communications officer on duty, both corroborating the same account, the correct finding supports itself. Reyes was quiet again. Cole could hear him thinking. The specific quality of silence that meant a precise and careful person was running a risk assessment. I didn't give you any of this, Reyes said. You called to tell me you couldn't help. Correct. A pause. The address you have for Walsh, is it current? I'm about to find out. If it's not current, Reyes said very carefully, the town's post office general delivery would route to the correct address. Small Oregon coastal towns tend to have only one post office. People who moved there recently tend to be known. Another pause. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, Cole said. Thank you, Captain. He ended the call. Dukes had been listening. He looked at Cole with one eyebrow slightly elevated. He just told you how to find Walsh without officially telling you anything, Dukes said. He's a good S2. He's going to be a good colonel someday. Dukes leaned back in his chair. Tanner's got a cousin who lives in Tillamook. That's coastal Oregon. He could drive the address in under 4 hours. It's 2100. It's 2100 here. Tanner's cousin exists in whatever time zone Oregon uses. Cole looked at the paper with Walsh's address. The town name was Manzanita. He had a rough geographic sense of the Oregon coast, and Manzanita was somewhere in the northern stretch, the part where the highway ran close to the water and the towns were small enough that newcomers were known and old-timers were known better. Get Tanner, Cole said. Tanner took the call in the corridor outside the barracks room at 2135, phone wedged between his ear and his shoulder, while he looked at the address Cole had written out for him. His expression as he read it was the expression of a man doing the arithmetic of distance and available time. My cousin's in Tillamook, Tanner said. Manzanita's 40 minutes south of that. He looked at Cole. You want me to drive there tonight? I want your cousin to drive there tonight, or early morning. Walsh needs to understand that the inquiry is moving Thursday and that the comms log he's been holding can be submitted as supplementary evidence through Cross's counsel before the preliminary hearing. And if he won't talk to a stranger who shows up at his door at 6 in the morning. Tell your cousin to say Daniel Mercer sent him. Tanner went still. He glanced at Dukes, who gave him a small nod that said, yes, you heard that correctly. Keep going. Walsh knew Daniel, Cole continued. He was on the radio the night it happened. He filed an incident report that got sealed. He called Cross 8 months ago and told her he still had the log. He's not someone who forgot. Cole met Tanner's eyes. He just needs to know that this time someone's going to actually use it. Tanner looked at the address for another second. Then he walked back into the corridor and made the call to his cousin. At 2200, Briggs appeared in the doorway of the barracks room with his wrapped arm and a look that said he'd been running his own parallel track and had arrived at conclusions. I pulled the name through a contact at JAG, Briggs said. Not the inquiry itself, the public filing record. The attorney of record on the prosecution side is a civilian counsel named Hartwell, Patricia Hartwell. She has a history of representing senior military and defense officials in proceedings that involve command-level accountability. He leaned against the doorframe. She's not a trial attorney. She specializes in making inconvenient facts disappear into procedural complexity before the trial starts. She's going to argue that Cross's evidence is inadmissible before the inquiry even reaches testimony, Cole said, or argue jurisdiction, or argue the original investigation was properly conducted and the inquiry has no grounds to revisit findings that were settled by the original closure. Briggs shrugged his unwrapped shoulder. Any of those moves buys her client's time and puts Cross in the position of responding rather than presenting. Which is why Thursday matters, Dukes said. The preliminary hearing is where they establish the framework. If Hartwell gets to define the framework without opposition, Everything after that is downstream of a bad setup. Cross's counsel needs the transcript before Thursday morning, Cole said. Not Thursday. Before Thursday. Tomorrow, Briggs said. Tomorrow. They looked at each other. The room had the particular atmosphere of men who have identified a problem with a defined solution and a shrinking window and enough combined capability to address it, which was an atmosphere most of them had lived in before and which produced in them not panic but compression, a narrowing of focus to the operational essentials. What do we actually have right now? Briggs said. Cole walked through it. Walsh's address, Tanner's cousin en route or near en route to Manzanita, Duke's fifth group contact, who had called back at 2200 and said, yes, I'll talk. I've been waiting 4 years for someone to ask. What do you need? Reyes's background information on Walsh's service record and the sealed incident report. Briggs's research on Hartwell. Cross's counsel, a Washington, D.C. attorney named Park, who was presumably awake and aware that the timeline had compressed, but might not yet know about Walsh or the comms log. Does Cross's counsel know about the log? Briggs asked. I don't know. Someone needs to call him tonight. Cross needs to make that call, Duke said. It has to come from her. Cole pulled out his phone and looked at the time, 22:13. Cross was not a person who went to bed early. He'd seen the light in her office at 2100 on the first night of training, and her truck had been in the parking lot when he'd left at 22:15. He had her facility contact number from the assessment documentation. He called it. She picked up on the third ring. Cross? It's Mercer. We have a line to Walsh. Someone's driving to Manzanita tonight. You need to call your counsel and tell him about the personal comms log. Tonight, so he can prepare a supplementary evidence submission. A silence that was 2 seconds long and contained considerable processing. You found Walsh, she said. Walsh. We have his address and a person driving to it. We also have a witness in fifth group who has independent recollection of the operational period and is willing to make a sworn statement. Cole paused. Your counsel needs to move before Hartwell gets to define the preliminary hearing framework. Another silence. You've been busy, Cross said. We've been busy, Cole said. Call Park. Tonight. She was quiet for another moment. You understand that this could complicate your positions, she said. If Hartwell decides to argue that the witnesses were coordinated through the assessed personnel, then she argues it and we deal with it, Cole said. Cross. Call Park. The line was quiet for long enough that Cole thought the call might have dropped. Then, all right. Tonight, she said. Mercer, why are you doing this? Cole thought about the right answer to that and couldn't find it quickly enough, so he gave the true one instead. Because you reported the discrepancies, he said. Because you asked them to abort. Because they sent you in anyway, and you made the correct tactical call, and Daniel Mercer died, and then the people who sent you in wrote a version of it that made it your fault. He paused. And because he was my father's brother, and nobody ever told me what actually happened to him, and I would like to know. The silence on Cross's end had a different quality than the preceding ones. He talked about your father, she said, finally, quietly. He said your father was the smartest person he'd ever known, and that he'd spent his whole life trying to catch up. A pause. He also said your father was a pain in the ass. Cole almost laughed. It came out as something less than a laugh, but in the same direction. That tracks, Cole said. Call me if Walsh makes contact. You'll hear when I hear. He ended the call. Dukes was looking at him from the desk with an expression that had a question in it that he wasn't asking aloud. Cole shook his head slightly. Not now, not tonight, there's work to do. And Dukes nodded and turned back to his laptop. Tanner's cousin, a construction worker named Pete, who was apparently accustomed to phone calls that made no sense arriving at hours that made less sense, reached Manzanita at 01:53 and called Tanner at 01:54 to report that the address was a small house on a street 3 blocks from the water. Lights off, truck in the driveway, no answer at the door. Tanner relayed this to Cole, who was awake on his bunk. Have him wait, Cole said. Walsh is 71. He's there. He's asleep. Pete has work in the morning. Tell Pete I'll buy him a case of whatever he drinks. He drinks craft IPAs. Tell Pete I'll buy him an expensive case of whatever he drinks. Pete waited. At 03:47, the light in Walsh's front room came on. Pete knocked. Look. The phone call from Walsh came to Cole's cell at 04:12. Not through Tanner, directly to Cole's number, which meant Walsh had gotten it from somewhere. From Cross, Cole would later determine, who had reached her counsel and been awake herself and had been in contact with Walsh directly in the window between Pete's knock and this call. Walsh's voice was the voice of a man who had been awake for a while already, or who had not really been asleep. It was rough in the way of age and the Oregon coast, a texture to it that was like weathered wood, and under the roughness there was something that Cole could only describe later as readiness. The readiness of a person who has been waiting for a specific thing and has finally heard the knock. "Mercer," Walsh said. "Walsh," Cole said. "She told me about you." Walsh's voice moved around the name like it was a piece of furniture he was deciding where to put. "She told me what your father's brother was to you." "What did she tell you?" "That you didn't know him. That you didn't know what happened." A pause that had the sound of a man deciding how to begin. "He was the best of the people I worked with over there. Not the flashiest, not the one with the most commendations. The best. The kind of person who is very quiet about what they're capable of, and you don't find out until the moment when it matters, and then you never forget it." Cole sat on the edge of his bunk in the dark. "I have the log," Walsh said. "I kept it on a personal device, non-government issued, which means it was never subject to the classification order that locked the official transcript. I've had counsel review it twice over the years. They agreed it was legally obtainable, but told me the window for it to matter had closed." He paused. "It doesn't sound like the window's closed." "The preliminary hearing is Thursday," Cole said. "Cross's counsel, his name is Park. He needs the log today. He needs to prepare a motion for supplementary evidence before Hartwell defines the framework." "Who's Hartwell?" "The other side's attorney. She specializes in procedural burial." A silence on Walsh's end. "I need to send it securely," Walsh said. "I'm not going to email a 4-year-old encrypted comms log through a Gmail account. Park will have a secure submission portal. I'll get you the contact information in the next hour." "All right." Walsh was quiet for a moment. "The log is complete. Every transmission I received from Cross's element that night, including the 3 reports of discrepancy, including Command's authorization response. They're on the record." "They're on my record," Walsh said. "The frequency was open enough that the entire transmission sequence should be retrievable if you dig into the right equipment logs. But those logs are the ones that got classified. What I have is the receiving end, my handset log, my written notation, and an audio file because I kept a secondary recorder running that night because something felt wrong from the start, and I was covering myself. I didn't know that was going to be the right call." "It was the right call," Cole said. Walsh exhaled. A long, tired exhale, the sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding at muscular effort for years. "Send me the contact information for Park," Walsh said. "I'll have the files ready in an hour." Check. By 700, Park had the files. Cole knew because Park called Cross at 6:58, and Cross sent Cole a 2-word message on the secure channel. He has it. By 7:30, the chalk was assembled in the Facility 7 parking lot, as they had been every morning, and Cross's truck was in its corner, and the marine layer was back, and nothing in the external environment had changed. The morning looked like every other morning this week. Inside, it felt different. They went through the training day. Cross ran 2 more scenarios, debrief simulations, decision chain reconstructions, the kind of applied analytical work that was different from the force-on-force, but built the same muscle underneath. She was present in the room in the same way she'd been present all week, which meant completely and without visible distraction. Cole watched her for signs of the weight and found them only in the small places. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands occasionally. The way she paused a half-second longer than usual before the start of one of the scenarios. At the midday break, she looked at him across the room and gave him a nod that was small and meant everything it needed to mean. He nodded back. At 14:30, they were midway through the second debrief simulation when the facility door opened. Cole registered it first because he was facing the entrance and because his threat assessment processing, sharpened by 3 days of Cross's training, had developed a new hair trigger on environmental changes. 3 people entered. Not base personnel, suits, which was the shorthand for the specific combination of civilian clothes and institutional bearing that said government employee who needs to be inside a military facility but doesn't want to look military. 2 men and a woman. The woman was carrying a leather portfolio. She was in her 50s, sharp-featured, with the kind of controlled posture that was not military but was adjacent to it. The posture of a person who spent their days in rooms where being physically authoritative mattered. Hartwell. Cole had not seen a photograph of her, but he was certain. The 2 men flanking her were legal staff or investigators, the kind of people who carried their own portfolios and said nothing until they were told to say something. Cross turned from the whiteboard where she'd been marking a decision chain mid-explanation. The room was very quiet. The chalk and the silent instructors all became stationary. Hartwell crossed the floor without being invited. She stopped 8 feet from Cross with the practiced stop of a woman who had calculated the correct distance for a conversation she controlled. "Commander Cross," she said. "Patricia Hartwell. We've been—" "I know who you are," Cross said. Hartwell absorbed this without expression. "I'd like a few minutes of your time, privately. This is a training facility in active use. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of my personnel." A slight adjustment in Hartwell's posture, the adjustment of someone recalibrating their approach without giving ground. "The preliminary hearing convenes Thursday morning. I'm here as a professional courtesy to discuss the possibility of a resolution," Cross said, "before Thursday. A negotiated finding." Hartwell's voice was neutral and practiced, and had the quality of someone reading from a document that hadn't been written down. One that acknowledges the operational complexity of the mission and assigns, Cross said, distributes accountability in a way that reflects distributes accountability. Cross set her marker on the whiteboard shelf. "You're offering me a deal where I accept partial responsibility for an operation where I reported 3 intelligence discrepancies before execution and was ordered to proceed anyway. The record of those discrepancies is what, Counselor?" Hartwell paused. "The official record," she said carefully, "does not reflect the transmission sequence you've described." "The official record was altered," Cross said, "which is a different statement than the transmission sequence I described not occurring." "Commander, I reported 3 discrepancies." Cross's voice hadn't changed in volume or temperature. It was the same flat, precise delivery she used in the training room, the same voice she'd used at the bar before Cole had made the worst decision of his recent life. "I asked for abort authorization. Command authorized execution. I executed. A member of my element was killed at an access point that was not in the pre-op package. I filed an after-action report reflecting the actual sequence of events. Someone altered the official record to remove the transmission sequence." She looked at Hartwell. "I don't have a distribution of accountability problem. Someone else does." Hartwell's portfolio carrying associate made a small sound that was the professional equivalent of a cough. Hartwell looked at him briefly. Something passed between them that Cole couldn't read but that registered as significant. A recalibration. "Cross's counsel filed a motion this morning," Hartwell's associate said quietly. Hartwell did not visibly react. "What motion?" Cross said. "Supplementary evidence motion," the associate said. "Personal comms log from the receiving communications officer on duty during the operational period. Audio file and written notation. Transmission sequence corroborating—" He stopped, apparently deciding how much to say in the room, and finished with corroborating the commander's account. Hartwell's posture did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted in a way that Cole, from 8 feet away, caught clearly. The shift of a person whose plan has encountered a structural obstacle and who is, with considerable professional discipline, not showing it. "I'll need to review the filing," Hartwell said. "Of course," Cross said. Hartwell looked at her. The look was professional and brief and contained beneath the professionalism and the brevity, the specific quality of a person who has understood that the terrain is different than she came in expecting. "We'll see you Thursday," Hartwell said. "Yes," Cross said. "You will." Hartwell turned and walked back to the facility entrance with the same controlled stride she'd entered with. Her associates followed. The door closed behind them. The training room was quiet. Tanner exhaled. Vasquez made a sound that was almost a laugh and cut it off. Briggs looked at Cole with an expression that said, "We actually did it," and Cole returned an expression that said, "We did part of it." Thursday is still Thursday. Cross stood at the whiteboard for a moment with her back partially to the room. Cole watched her shoulders. Then she turned around. "Where were we?" she said. "Decision chain at the 4-minute mark," Duke said. "You were about to explain why Vasquez's secondary call was correct." "Right." She picked up her marker. "Vasquez, walk me through your reasoning." Vasquez walked her through it. Cross listened with the clipboard in her arm and the marker in her hand and the same quality of complete attention she'd given every moment of every day this week. And if her hand was steadier than usual or less steady, it was not a thing she would have allowed to be visible. The day ended at the same time as every other day, and the after-action ran its course, and the chalk filed out into the parking lot with the particular tiredness of people who have done several things at once and are only now, in the release of the structured environment, feeling the compound weight of all of it. Cole was last out, as he had been every day. Cross was at her desk. She was on the phone, and he could tell from the first 2 words he heard, "Yes, Park," that it was her counsel, and that whatever Park was telling her was producing in her a quality of stillness that was different from the training room stillness. More personal. The stillness of someone who has been holding their breath for 4 years and is only now beginning to understand that it might, against reasonable expectation, be safe to exhale. Cole went out. In the parking lot, Dukes was leaning against Cole's truck with his phone to his ear, and when he saw Cole, he held up a finger, 1 minute, and finished his call and pocketed the phone. "Fifth group contact," Dukes said. "He spoke with Park's office this afternoon. Sworn statement is being prepared. He'll sign tomorrow morning." Cole nodded. 3 witnesses, Dukes said. Walsh, the log, and the 5th group contact. Park says that's enough to compel the inquiry to address the transmission sequence before any other finding. Enough to clear her. Dukes thought about it. Enough to make clearing her the only honest outcome. They stood in the parking lot for a moment. The marine layer was lifting, finally, the late afternoon pushing through it in long, pale shafts that lit the concrete and the perimeter fence and the surface of the lot in a way that made everything look momentarily clarified, defined, seen more sharply than usual. "Dukes." "Yeah." "Thank you." Dukes looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who has a lot of things he could say and has decided that none of them are necessary. "Get in the truck," Dukes said. "I need something to eat." Cole got in the truck. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, looking at the facility building. The light in Cross's office was on. He could see the edge of it through the window, the flat institutional glow of a fluorescent fitting. Nothing warm about it, just light against the darkening afternoon. He thought about Daniel Mercer, who had died at a tertiary access point on a vessel that wasn't in the pre-op package, in the Eastern Mediterranean 4 years ago, on a mission that the official record said had been cleanly executed. He thought about what it meant to be very quiet about what you were capable of, and to be the best of the people someone had worked with, and to be described as a pain in the ass by the person who knew you best. He thought about Walsh and his house in Manzanita, 71 years old, with a personal comms log on a non-government device that he'd kept for 4 years because something in him had known, or hoped, that eventually the window would open again. And he thought about Thursday. 2 days. 2 days to a preliminary hearing that was now, for the first time, a fair fight. He started the engine. "What do you want to eat?" he said. "Something hot," Duke said. "Something that involves someone else cooking it. That covers most food." "Good," Duke said. "Drive." Cole drove. Behind them, the light in Cross's office stayed on, and she stayed on the phone with her counsel, and the afternoon continued its slow work of becoming evening, and somewhere in the system of files and sealed records and classified transmission logs, a truth that had been buried for 4 years had just been given a way out. Wednesday passed the way the day before. A hard thing always passes. Too slow in the morning and too fast by evening. The hours doing that warping thing where you check the clock expecting it to be later and it isn't. And then you check again and somehow you're out of time. Cole spent the morning in the training room running the final scheduled assessment scenarios, which Cross delivered with the same methodical precision as every other day, because whatever was happening Thursday, and today was today, and the work in the room was the work in the room. That was the thing about her that Cole had spent the week trying to articulate and kept failing to reduce to a single description. She did not allow adjacent noise into her operational space. Whatever she was carrying, She carried it somewhere that didn't interfere with her hands. By midday, Park had filed the supplementary evidence motion with the inquiry board. Walsh's log was submitted as Exhibit A, the audio file as Exhibit B, and Dukes' fifth group contact, a master sergeant named Garza, who had spent 4 years in his own version of Walsh's house, holding something he couldn't put down, had signed his sworn statement at 09:15 and faxed it to Park's office from a library in Fayetteville because Garza did not own a printer. Cole learned this detail from Dukes, who had learned it from Garza directly, and something about the image, a master sergeant driving to a public library to fax a sworn statement, was so mundanely human that it cut through the procedural weight of everything around it and landed as the realest thing that had happened all week. At 1400, Park called Cross. Cole was in the corridor when she took the call. He wasn't close enough to hear it and wasn't trying to be, but he was close enough to see her through the partial glass of the office door, standing at her desk. And he watched her face during the call, the way you watch a face when you're trying to understand something. The words alone won't tell you. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was brief. At one point she sat down, which she almost never did during phone calls. She sat and listened and looked at the surface of her desk, and then she said something short and ended the call. She sat at the desk for a moment longer. Then she stood up and came out of the office and walked back into the training room without looking at Cole. And her face was arranged in its usual professional configuration, and she said, "Last scenario of the day. Let's finish clean." They finished clean. Thursday morning. Cole was awake at 04:45 and did not fight it. He dressed and went out into the pre-dawn dark of the base and walked the perimeter road for 40 minutes. The kind of walking that wasn't exercise but was the body's way of managing what the mind was doing. The marine layer was thick this morning, close to fog, and the base lights made diffuse halos in it, everything soft-edged and suspended. The Pacific was 2 miles west and inaudible but present in the air. He thought about his father. There was a call he hadn't made. He'd thought about making it every night since Cross had said the name, your father's brother. And every night he'd put the phone down. Not because he didn't want to have the conversation, but because he didn't yet have enough of the truth to offer it, and offering a partial truth about something that Large felt worse than offering nothing. He wanted to be able to tell his father what actually happened, the complete version, the one that included the discrepancies Cross reported, and the authorization that came back anyway, and the third access point in Walsh's log and Garza's sworn statement. He wanted to be able to tell his father that someone had fought for it. He'd make the call tonight, he decided. Whatever happened at the hearing, tonight. He walked back to the barracks and showered and put on his dress uniform because it was a day that seemed to call for it, though nobody had told him to, and went to find Dukes. Dukes was in dress uniform. Cole looked at him. "Nobody told me to either," Dukes said. "It just seemed right." They went and got the others. The inquiry hearing convened at 900 in a building Cole had walked past dozens of times without ever going inside. A low administrative structure on the base's eastern side, set back from the main road, with a parking lot that was already half full when they arrived at 0820. Government plates, mostly. 2 sedans with Virginia tags that probably belonged to Hartwell's team. A rental car that Cole guessed was Park's, the D.C. attorney having driven up the night before. They were not authorized to be in the hearing room. The proceeding was closed to non-essential personnel. Cole had not expected to be inside. He and Dukes and the rest of the chalk found positions in the corridor outside. A bench along the wall, a row of chairs that looked like they'd been there since the building was constructed. The kind of furniture that exists in institutional corridors to give people somewhere to wait that isn't the floor. They waited. Cross had arrived earlier, alone. Cole had seen her car in the lot when they pulled in. She had not texted or called. She was inside with Park, doing the thing that required doing. The corridor had a window at the far end that looked out over the parking lot, and through it the marine layer was beginning to lift, the morning working on it slowly from the east. Vasquez watched the window. Tanner read something on his phone. Briggs sat with his wrapped arm on his knee and his eyes on the floor and his jaw set in the way it had been set for most of the week. Dukes had his legal pad. He was adding to it. Cole sat with nothing in his hands. At 900, the sounds from inside the hearing room, The muffled traffic of furniture and voices settling into positions went quiet. The proceeding had started. Cole looked at the door. It was a standard institutional door, the kind that told you nothing. He sat back in the chair. At 09:23, the door opened. Not the hearing room door. A side door at the end of the corridor, the one that led to the administrative wing. Through it came two men who Cole recognized after a half-second delay as the associates who had accompanied Hartwell into Facility 7 the previous afternoon. They walked past the Chalk's bench without looking at any of them, their pace slightly faster than casual, the pace of people who have been told something and need to respond to it. Dukes looked at Cole. Cole watched the associates disappear through a door at the far end of the corridor. "Something happened," Dukes said quietly. "Something's happening," Cole said. "It's not over." They waited. At 09:51, the side door opened again. This time it was one of the inquiry board's administrative staff, a young specialist in dress uniform who was carrying a folder and wearing the expression of someone executing a task in an environment that was above their normal operational altitude. She went into the hearing room. At 10:04, the specialist came back out without the folder. At 10:11, the hearing room door opened. Park came out first. He was in his 60s, compact, with the kind of unremarkable face that Cole suspected was a professional asset. He closed the hearing room door behind him and looked down the corridor and found Cole and walked to him directly, which told Cole something about what Cross had told Park about who would be in the corridor. "The board asked for a 30-minute recess to review the Walsh submission," Park said. His voice was controlled, but there was something under the control that was the professional equivalent of a man trying not to run. When they went to Hartwell for response, she requested the recess. Standard procedural move. It means she needs time to assess whether her approach is still viable. "Is it?" Cole said. Park looked at him carefully. "The audio file is unambiguous. Walsh's handset captured the entire transmission sequence in real time. Cross's 3 discrepancy reports are on it, 1 through 3, with timestamps. Command's authorization response is on it. There is no interpretive window. It either happened or it didn't, and Walsh's audio establishes that it happened." He paused. "Hartwell knows this now. She knew it when Park filed yesterday, but she's only now hearing the audio quality. What does that mean for the hearing?" "It means the only question left is whether the board follows the evidence to its necessary conclusion or finds a procedural way to reduce the scope of findings." He looked at the hearing room door. "I don't think they'll find a procedural way. The documentation is too clean." Cole looked at the door, too. "How's Cross?" he said. Park considered the question. "She's the calmest person in that room," he said, "by a significant margin." He went back inside. The recess ran 38 minutes, not 30. Cole spent it in the chair with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance, running the operational space in his head the way Cross had trained him to. Not the next thing, but all the things at once. The complete picture. Walsh's audio, Garza's statement, the sealed incident report that if the board now had grounds to unseal it, would corroborate the pattern across the official record. Hartwell's calculation, whatever it was producing in real time. The board, whoever they were, sitting in that room with evidence that was not interpretable. At 10:49, Duke's phone vibrated. He looked at it and showed Cole the screen. It was a message from Garza. 2 words. Watching. Waiting. Cole thought about a master sergeant driving to a library in Fayetteville to fax a document on behalf of a woman he'd never met, because the woman he had known had been Daniel Mercer, and some things were owed past the person they were owed to. He typed back, "We've got it from here." Garza responded with a single period, which was somehow exactly right. The hearing room door opened at 10:51. The administrative specialist held it. Through the opening, Cole could see the edge of the room, a conference table, several chairs, the side of a face he didn't recognize, the corner of a flag. Then Park appeared in the doorway and looked down the corridor. "Mercer," he said. Cole stood. "The board is requesting the presence of the assessment personnel," Park said, "as background witnesses to Commander Cross's current operational engagement and professional conduct. It's voluntary. You're not compelled." Cole looked at Dukes. Dukes stood. The others stood. Cole walked down the corridor and through the door. Quotes. The hearing room was smaller than he'd expected. A rectangular table, 6 members of the inquiry board down one side. a mix of active duty and civilian, the civilian members in the specific neutral attire of people who made official decisions for a living. Hartwell was at the far end of the table with her two associates, and she looked at Cole when he entered with an expression that was unreadable in the way that expensive expressions are unreadable. Cross was at the near end of the table, with Park. She was in her service uniform. Cole hadn't seen her in it before. The uniform changed her in a specific way that dress uniforms change people, surfaced things that were otherwise structural, invisible. The commendations on her chest were not few, and the rank device was what it was. She looked at Cole when he came in, and her expression was the expression of someone who has been waiting for a thing without letting themselves fully expect it. The board's senior member, a rear admiral named Castillo, looked at the chalk standing in the doorway. "Come in," Castillo said. "Find a wall." They found walls. Castillo looked at Cole specifically. "You're the chalk that's been in Commander Cross's assessment facility this week." "Yes, sir." "You coordinated the contact with the communications officer Walsh." "Yes, sir." "And the sworn statement from Master Sergeant Garza." "With my chalk's assistance, sir." Castillo looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Cross. Then he opened the folder in front of him and looked at what was inside it, which was the thing he'd been looking at before the recess, and his face did not change. "Ms. Hartwell," Castillo said. Hartwell looked up from her end of the table. Her portfolio was closed in front of her. This was, Cole understood, significant. A portfolio open was a portfolio ready. A portfolio closed was a portfolio that had been put away. The supplementary evidence motion was filed within the evidentiary window, Castillo said. The Walsh submission, the audio file specifically, establishes the transmission sequence with sufficient clarity that it cannot be set aside on procedural grounds. The board is in agreement on that. He looked at her. "What is your client's position in light of this material?" Hartwell looked at the table surface for a moment. It was a brief moment. She was a professional, and professionals do not allow their moments to run long. But it was real. "Our client's position," she said, "is that the materials require review before Ms. Hartwell." Castillo's voice was not unkind. "The board has reviewed the materials. We have done so during the recess. The transmission sequence is what Commander Cross has consistently stated it to be. The discrepancy reports are on the recording. The authorization response is on the recording. The question this inquiry was convened to answer has been answered." He paused. "I'm asking whether your client's position has changed in light of that answer." Hartwell looked at Castillo. Then she looked at Cross. Something passed across Hartwell's face in that look. A transit that was there and gone quickly, but Cole caught it, and he thought it was something close to the recognition that the ground under the plan had been removed, and what remained was the plan standing in the air. "Our client's position," Hartwell said, "is that the matter should be resolved consistent with the evidence." Castillo wrote something on his pad. He capped his pen. "Then we're in agreement," he said. The formal findings took 40 minutes to read into the record. Cole stood at the wall for all of it. He did not look at Cross for most of it, because looking at her felt like an intrusion on something that needed to happen in whatever private space she occupied behind her face. He looked at the table. At the window on the far side of the room, which showed the parking lot and the lifting marine layer, and beyond the perimeter fence, a strip of highway and the faint blue suggestion of what lay past it. The findings were thorough. They established the transmission sequence from Walsh's audio as the primary record of pre-operational communications, superseding the altered official transcript. They established that Commander Cross had reported 3 specific intelligence discrepancies prior to execution. They established that command authorization had been given with full knowledge of those discrepancies. They established that the tactical call Cross had made during the operation, the redirection of 2 element members to the secondary vessel, was consistent with standard doctrine for close-quarters maritime operations under contact from multiple vectors, and that the outcome at the primary target's tertiary access point was attributable to an intelligence failure in the pre-op package, not to any decision made by the element leader during execution. They restored Daniel Mercer's service record to reflect death under conditions of operational complexity, attributable to intelligence failure rather than command error. They found, formally and on the record, that Commander Ava Cross had acted with professional competence throughout the operation and in the subsequent reporting period. They referred the matter of the official records alteration to a separate investigation to be conducted by relevant authorities into the persons responsible for the alteration. Castillo closed the folder. The room was quiet for a moment. "Commander Cross," Castillo said. Cross looked at him. "The record is clear," he said. "All of it." She nodded, a single, careful nod. "Thank you, Admiral," she said. Her voice was what it had always been, level, complete, without overflow. But something in it had a different quality, not softer, more settled, the quality of a thing that has been put down after a long carrying. Protect. In the corridor outside the hearing room, the chalk gathered around her the way men gather around someone after a thing has been survived. Not loudly, without ceremony, just present in the specific way of people who have been in the same direction for a while and are now standing in the same place. Cross came out of the hearing room last, with Park beside her. She saw the chalk in the corridor and stopped. Park said something quietly to her and went to make his calls. Cross stood in the corridor in her service uniform and looked at the five of them. The bruise on her lip had faded to its fourth-day color, almost gone, just a shadow at the corner of her mouth. Vasquez was the one who spoke first, which surprised everyone, including Vasquez. "Is it done?" he asked. The question came out younger than he was. "It's done," Cross said. Tanner exhaled. Briggs nodded once and looked at the floor, the way Briggs always handled things that mattered. Dukes put his hands in his pockets and looked at the ceiling briefly in the way of a man performing a rapid internal recalibration. Cole looked at Cross. She looked at him. "Walsh," she said. Not a question. "Walsh," Cole said. "I need to call him. He'll want to hear your voice." She nodded, paused. "And Garza." "He faxed the statement from a library in Fayetteville," Cole said. "You can call him. He'll say it was nothing. He'll mean it was everything." Something moved in her expression, not a smile exactly, something close to one, arriving from a direction she hadn't been looking. "Your father's brother," she said. "He would have done the same thing, all of this. He would have done every part of it." She looked at Cole steadily. "I want you to know that." Cole held her gaze. The corridor was quiet. Through the window at the end, the marine layer had finally lifted, fully, and the morning was pale and clear in the way that mornings get clear on the California coast when the fog releases them. Everything visible, everything itself, nothing softened by the cover of it. "I'm going to call my father tonight," Cole said, "and tell him what happened, the true account." Cross was quiet for a moment. "Tell him Daniel talked about him constantly," she said. "Tell him Daniel said your father was the most irritating, brilliant person he'd ever known, which from Daniel was about the highest compliment available." "I'll tell him." She nodded. A silence between them that wasn't empty. "What happens now?" Dukes asked. He was looking at Cross. "For you." She thought about it. "Park has additional filings to prepare," she said. "The referral for the record alteration investigation. That's going to move slowly, and it's going to involve people who have institutional resources, and it's going to be complicated." She said this without heat, as fact. "I'll be part of that process for a while." "And the work," Dukes said. "The training. This week." Cross looked at him. "Castillo asked me this morning before the hearing opened whether I would consider a permanent position. Advanced combat assessment, the full tier. Not just tier 2 units, the whole ladder." She paused. "Contracted, based here. Ongoing." "What did you tell him?" Vasquez asked. "I told him I'd think about it." She looked at the hearing room door. "I've been thinking about it." "And," Tanner said. She looked at the chalk. At each of them, one face at a time, the same systematic survey she'd used since the first morning. It landed differently now, Cole thought. Or maybe it was the same, and he was different, and the difference was making him read it differently. "Yes," she said. "I told him yes." Outside, the parking lot was warm in the late morning light. The government sedans with the Virginia plates were still there. Hartwell's rental car was gone. Cole noted the empty space where it had been with the same neutral attention he'd note any change in a room's configuration. Not satisfaction, just observation. She had done the work she'd been paid to do, and the work had run into better evidence, and she had adjusted her position and left. That was the job. Cole had no feeling about it beyond the noting of it. Park was in the parking lot on his phone, leaning against his own rental car with a yellow legal pad balanced on the hood, writing things down while talking. He was going to be busy for a while. The referral process would be its own long work. The chalk stood in the lot in the loose configuration they'd arrived in. Cross stood apart from them slightly. Not distance, just the natural arrangement of a person who had been alone with something for a long time and was still calibrating what it meant that the something was, now, over. Cole walked to her. She looked at him when he approached and waited. He reached into the inside pocket of his dress uniform jacket. His father's challenge coin. He'd put it in before leaving the barracks that morning without quite knowing why. The same way he'd put on the dress uniform, because the day had seemed to require it. He took it out. It was worn on the edges. His father had carried it for 20 years, and the edge detail was soft in places. The relief of the insignia slightly reduced. A thing that had been handled. A thing that was real in the way of handled things. He held it out to Cross. She looked at it, looked at him. "My father's," Cole said. "He'd want you to have it. He doesn't know yet that I'm giving it to you. So when I call him tonight, the conversation is going to be long." He paused. "But he'd want you to have it." Cross looked at the coin for a long moment. Then she took it, turned it over once in her hand, looked at the worn edge. "Tell your father," she said, "that I'll give it back to him when this is finished. All of it. When the referral runs its course and the record is what it should be. He'll say keep it." "Tell him anyway." "Yes, ma'am." She looked up at him. "You're going to stop calling me ma'am at some point." "Probably not today." She looked at the coin once more and closed her hand around it. "Come back next week," she said. "There's more work." Cole looked at her. "What kind of work?" "The kind we started Monday." She met his eyes. "You tracked 6 elements simultaneously. I want to know what 7 looks like." He held her gaze for a moment. "We'll be here," he said. She nodded, turned and walked to her truck in the corner of the lot, her stride the same as every other stride she'd taken all week. Purposeful, economical, the gait of a person who always knows where they're going and doesn't announce the knowing of it. Cole watched her go. Dukes came to stand beside him. "Well?" Dukes said. "Well?" Cole said. "She's coming back." "She's coming back." They watched Cross's truck back out of the corner spot and move toward the lot exit. "Your father's going to want details," Dukes said. "Yeah, all of them. I know. That's a long call. I know." Cole looked at the sky over the base. The marine layer was fully gone now, all the way out to the horizon, and the day was clear from the ground up. "He deserves the long call." Dukes nodded. The rest of the chalk filtered toward the vehicles in 1s and 2s, the loose disassembly of people who have been tightly assembled for a purpose and are now releasing back into their separate orbits. Vasquez said something to Tanner that made Tanner laugh. A real laugh, short and sudden, the kind that surprises the person making it. Briggs touched the wrap on his forearm once and then let his hand fall, checking and finding it still there, which was an accounting that satisfied him. Cole stood in the lot for a moment longer. He thought about the bar last Saturday, the rain, the sound of the slap, the blood at the corner of her mouth, and the eyes that had been more frightening than any threat posture he'd ever encountered, because they contained nothing, no anger, no pain, no performance, just the absolute calm of a person who knew exactly what they were and had nothing to prove about it. He had walked into that bar with the casual certainty of a man who had never seriously been required to examine the quality of his own attention. He had left it with 3 of his teammates on the floor and a coin on the counter, and a week he would spend the rest of his career measuring other things against. He didn't know what to call what had happened to him this week. Training was too small a word. Correction implied the wrong thing. Education was close but academic. And what had happened was not academic. It had happened in his body and in the operational space of his mind and in the corridor outside a hearing room and in a truck cab on a coastal highway at night. He got in the truck. Dukes was already in the passenger seat. Cole sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. "Dukes?" "Yeah." "Do you think he knew?" Cole said. "Daniel." "Do you think he knew when he confirmed the call and continued the approach? Do you think he knew what the access point might be?" Dukes was quiet for a while. "I think," Dukes said,
that he was the best of the people she worked with. And I think that means he saw exactly what it was, and he made the call anyway, because someone had to, and he was the one who was there. A pause. I think that's what the best of them do.
Cole looked at the building. Yeah, he said. He started the truck. Ingat. He called his father that night at 1930, sitting on the edge of his bunk in the quiet barracks room with Dukes absent and the door closed and his uniform jacket hung on the back of the chair with the pocket empty where the coin had been. His father picked up on the fourth ring, his voice carrying the slight delay of someone answering from another room, slightly out of breath, slightly annoyed at the interruption, and then the annoyance dropping away the moment he registered it was Cole. "What's wrong?" his father said, because that was always his father's first read on unexpected calls. "Nothing's wrong," Cole said. "Nothing is wrong, but I need to tell you about something, and it's going to take a while, and I need you to just listen for most of it." His father was quiet. "It's about Daniel," Cole said. A long silence on the line. "Tell me," his father said. Cole told him. All of it. The bar, the coin, the woman who had turned out to be the woman, the 3 days in the training room, the conversation in the small office with the chip in the coffee cup handle, Walsh and Manzanita with a personal comms log, and 4 years of waiting, Garza at a library fax machine in Fayetteville, Park in the hearing room, Castillo with his folder, Hartwell's portfolio, closed, and Daniel Mercer, who had confirmed the call and continued the approach, because someone had to, because he was the one who was there. His father listened to all of it. When Cole finished, the line was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that needed to be quiet, that would have been disturbed by anything added to it. Then his father said, "He would have liked her." "Yeah," Cole said, "he would have. He would have liked you too." A pause, rougher this time. He'd have given you a hard time about the bar. I know. About putting your hands on someone who... I know, Dad. I'm saying he'd have had opinions. He would have had extensive opinions. A sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "She kept the coin?" his father said. "She's going to give it back when the referral process is done, when the full record is corrected. She should keep it." "That's what I told her." His father was quiet again. Cole could hear him breathing. The particular breathing of a man managing something that was too large for the moment and doing it in the only way available, which was one breath at a time. "Thank you," his father said finally, "for finding it out, for finding it out." "I had help," Cole said. "You had a team," his father said. "That's different." Cole looked at the wall of the barracks room. Plain white. A scuff mark near the door from something that had happened before Cole arrived and would still be there after he left. "Yeah," he said, "that's different." They talked for another hour. 2 weeks later, Commander Ava Cross accepted the permanent position at Blackridge Naval Station as Lead Advanced Combat Assessment Instructor for Tier 1 through Tier 3 units. The letter of appointment was signed by Castillo and countersigned by 2 flag officers, whose names meant things in rooms Cole was not yet cleared for. The referral investigation opened the same week. It was going to take time. That was the nature of investigations that involved people with institutional resources and the motivation to use them. Park had told Cross to expect a year, possibly more. She had said she understood. She had said she'd been patient before. The Chalk's assessment results were filed in the permanent record. Vasquez's spatial backup tracking was noted as exceeding standards for his rank and profile. Tanner's contact engagement timing was flagged for remediation and 2 weeks of targeted work. Briggs's arm healed in 12 days. Dukes was contacted separately by the assessment office with a question about whether he'd be interested in a cross-training opportunity that he declined politely and then thought about for a week, and then reconsidered. Cole tracked 7 elements simultaneously on the first day of the follow-on training block. Not cleanly. The 7th was rough and cost him on the exit sequence, and Cross noted it without comment, which meant it was real and required more work. He did it again the next day. Rough in different places. The day after that, the roughness was in fewer places. On a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the hearing, Cross stopped the day's final scenario midway through and looked at Cole with the assessment expression he'd learned to read over the week they'd spent together, the one that meant she'd observed something that required noting. "What?" Cole said. "7," she said. He hadn't counted. He'd stopped counting. That was the thing she'd been building toward, he understood now. Not the number, but the cessation of the need to count. He looked at her. "Yee. Keep going," Cross said. "Don't lose it." He kept going. He didn't lose it. There is a kind of strength that announces itself, that takes up space and uses volume and needs you to know that it's there. It's not a useless kind. It has its applications, its moments, its place in the field. But it is not the kind that lasts, and it is not the kind that builds anything. And when it meets the other kind, the kind that has been made in silence over years of carrying what others couldn't put down, it finds that it has nothing left once the volume is gone. The other kind doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It simply waits and works, and when the moment comes, it is already exactly what it needs to be. That is what it means to be someone others can trust when everything falls apart. Not the loudest person in the room, not the most decorated, the most commended, the most noticed. The one who is already holding the right thing before anyone knew the right thing needed holding. That is the only strength worth becoming.